Your host organization today is KAIROS Regina. Regina is located on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional territory of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota people, and homeland of the Métis. Today's event is the annual gathering of KAIROS Prairies North, a region that includes Saskatchewan, Alberta, and the Northwest Territories. That area touches Treaty 2 territory in southeast Saskatchewan, where I come from, where some of the coal plants that have powered this province for too long are located. In our second panel this afternoon, you will hear about legal work to end coal-fired generation. Treaty 7 territory in southern Alberta is the location of the People's Forum you'll be hearing about in the first panel after our lunch break, along with its theme of Jubilee. Just before lunch, you will hear stories of other KAIROS activities across these territories. And continuing northward, Treaty 6 territory crosses central Saskatchewan and crosses central Saskatchewan and Alberta, including Saskatoon and Edmonton. Treaty 10 crosses north central and northeast Saskatchewan. Treaty 8 covers northern Alberta and into the Northwest Territories. And Treaty 11 runs all the way to the Arctic Ocean. There, the land touches waters that connect us to people around the world. In our keynote presentation this morning, we will learn about the Christian roots of today's topic of a global Jubilee movement to bring relief from burdens of debt. As we learn about Jubilee today, we are also making connections from this work into our own lives and places. And as we do this work, we may find ourselves hungering for guidance, strength, and comfort. At last year's annual gathering of KAIROS Prairies North, we heard from Matt Oliver, Sean Sanford Beck, and others about connecting more deeply with the land and our more than human neighbors to find that guidance and strength. Recently, I have been attending Sean's weekly Green Spirit Drove, an hour spent helping one another to hear the voices of creation. We read the Bible with green lenses, sometimes finding God's creatures speaking within the text, and at other times asking what they might say if they read the scripture along with us. In September, we heard the cry of Jeremiah. Oh, that my head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears. I would weep day and night for the slain of my people. Our discussion that day touched a well of deep grief within me for all that is passing from this beautiful created world. With Jeremiah, I thought, one human cannot cry enough. And then, somehow, I sensed that this grief was not mine to carry alone. Springs of water, streams and rivers throughout this land carry it with me. From the shore of Wascana Lake by the West Lawn at the Saskatchewan Legislature, where teepees have stood in silent witness to defend our sacred treaty promises, through the waterways that join Wascana with other waters from all across the prairies, through Lake Winnipeg and the Nelson River, to the salty, womb-like waters of Hudson Bay. I offer you the gift of all these great waters for the moments today when grief touches you, when the chasm between the present moment and your hope of a just future seem too great. Remember that KAIROS means God's time, and in God's time, all things are possible. Remember too the land and waters that grieve with you, that hold you, and that faithfully bring new life to birth. And now I would like to introduce Joe Elkerton, who will open our day in a good way. Joe is a member of the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation and a child of survivors of the Indian residential school system. Joe has an impressive career of working with some of the most vulnerable communities. He started his ministry work with the Salvation Army and then eventually became a pastor of an Indigenous church as part of the Scott Mission in Toronto. Joe has worked with survivors of human trafficking, notably starting a safe house for women in need of shelter and protection from their traffickers. He also has an interest in the well-being of Indigenous families going through the child welfare system and was the president of Toronto's Native Child and Family Services for many years. In his extensive community work, Joe has been on the Aboriginal Council for World Vision Canada and the Aboriginal Task Force for the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, as well as the Governance Committee for the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies. He has served as a training officer with the Canadian Forces and was an instructor at the National Native Bible College in Deseronto, Ontario. Joe has a passion for developing outreach programs and educational workshops for Indigenous communities on and off reserve. Joe recently moved to Regina to become executive director of the Indigenous Christian Fellowship. Welcome, Joe.
Sounds like I've been busy. Thank you for the warm welcome. I think sometimes as I sit and listen to the intro and kind of remember some of the stuff, it's hard to believe that God has kind of had me on this journey for a while. Being part of a faith community wasn't my journey. I didn't actually attend church until I was probably in my early 20s, and through a series of events ended up connecting with Salvation Army people on the streets of Toronto while I was in the midst of my addiction and stuff like that. So it's been an interesting journey, and it's brought me to, I tell people recently that if you had asked me in March if I was going to be in Regina, Saskatchewan, I probably would have, no, how could that happen? But if you leave yourself open to, I think, what I think the Creator has opened for you, things move quite quickly. And so I find myself here, and I made the journey in July. Me and my two cats journeyed across Canada to be here in this very cold province. So somebody said, "Are you gonna take your jacket off?" It's like, no. I got like 4 shirts on. Somebody said I'll get used to it, and I said, I hope so. Or maybe I don't want to. Maybe I want to go back where it's warmer. So anyway, it's been an interesting journey as you kind of read I've heard a bit. I am a member of the Chippewa Thames First Nations. My parents were products of the residential school. I'm the youngest of 11. Grew up in Regent Park in Toronto. That's where I was born. My parents, because of their addictions, had kind of left us at different times, abandoned us for 2 or 3 weeks while they were in the midst of their addictions. Children's Aid stepped in. I think probably, as I look back, it was probably one of my first contacts with the church. So if you know Regent Park, so Queen and Parliament, there's a big Roman Catholic church there. And so when my parents left, my siblings and I would kind of wander the streets, stealing from stores and looking for food in the neighborhood. And there was a behind the church, there was a garbage, and we were rummaging through there one day looking for something to eat. And this priest came out and goes, "Hey." And my brothers and sisters and I just ran away, figured he was mad at us. And a couple days later, we went back, and my brother lifted up the garbage can and he said, "Look at how dumb these priests are. They left these perfectly wrapped sandwiches on this garbage." I think I look back on that kind of instance and I thought, here was a guy who thought, there's kids in the neighborhood who are hungry, and maybe I don't want to scare them off. So how do I get food to them in a way that kind of is safe for them? So I think about that as many years from after I ended up being the director of the Salvation Army in Regent Park, and was very much involved in food for the neighborhood and things like that. And I think it's been a thing that I've been involved in for a long, long time, of delivering sandwiches, bag lunches to people who live in downtown Toronto. And I find myself in Regina, one of the things and where the center is located. One of the things that is kind of evolving is the idea of feeding the neighborhood. And so I think that, but that comes from my particular, what I sense was my calling, kind of as I journeyed in my Christian life. I think people kept asking, how come you don't get involved in Indigenous ministries? And I just kind of always shied away from it. I just think that wasn't me. I'm kind of an inner city guy. And it's God kind of led me into that and opened that world up that world to me becoming very passionate. And I really felt this calling. And I always tell people my calling was kind of that Nehemiah calling. What's happened to the land of my forefathers? That's how he begins this story. And that was my question as I sat in Scott Mission and was giving my testimony talk about my life's journey. And sitting in the congregation that morning was an aunt from my reserve who recognized the story about how I'd been abandoned, how our family had been abandoned by our parents because of their alcohol. And we had been taken into children's aid and then sent off to foster homes. And that was kind of the last time we were all together, was in an orphanage. And then we were just, they thought it was a good idea to just separate us in the middle of the night. We'd wake up and somebody be gone because they thought it'd be less emotional for us to kind of have these long goodbyes. And so you just kind of woke up and you kind of said, where's my sister? Where's my brother? And they've gone to a new home. And so that was their kind of way of keeping us safe. But that was kind of our separation. So here I am at Scott Mission many years later, giving this story about how God's and I have kind of interacted and how I've come to faith. And an aunt is there recognizing the story, and she connects me with my family. Within a week, I started getting phone calls from brothers and sisters and started to rebuild that relationship. And again, feeling that call to kind of be involved in Indigenous ministries. And I said, for me, I always kind of want to hear from God through the scriptures about, is this real? And it really, the story of Nehemiah resonated with me more about his journey, because I think that was my journey. He said he wanted to restore the walls, because when he says, what's happened to the land of my forefathers? The walls are broken and the gates are burned. And so when I read that, it was kind of like, it means that the community that he lived in had been broken down and the people were scattered without hope and without a safe place. So I've poured my energy into rebuilding, sounds weird, but building those walls and making sure that the gates are strong. Why? So that the people inside those walls can live healthy and make decisions about love and spirituality. So the walls in Nehemiah were not meant to keep people out, but they were meant to keep the people inside safe. So I think as I think about that, as I come to Regina, it's another project of, for me, kind of responding to that Nehemiah call of like, how do we do that? Well, in Nehemiah's time, the families worked together to restore different parts of the wall, but they also worked with their sword in one hand and bricks in another. For me, when I was in my prayer time, the imagery was of us working with the bricks. So for me, it's the food that we give out, it's the clothes that we give out, it's those things that build the community. And the spiritual stuff, the spiritual warfare stuff is the sword in one hand, is our prayer time and our meditation time, praying for our community. So there has to be that balance as we respond in a way that's kind of the Nehemiah call to how we build strong communities. Is like, we need to spend our time praying, doing that spiritual warfare, interceding for our communities, as well as doing those heavy lifting things, carrying the bricks and building the wall. So I think that those are important. So I think that's kind of why I'm here. Instead of not retiring in Toronto. Thank you for your time. We're going to invite folk to smudge with us. My friend Jennifer's here. Jennifer's been going to the ICF for a long time, and her family's been connected to there. And so I invited her to come out and help me with she's kind of like my smudge person. Thank you. Let me pray for us before we get going. Our Creator, Our God, thank you as we are called to do acts of justice and to build strong communities and to restore lives and to be involved in the healing of your creation and your people. So just be with us as we gather today and just guide our hearts and our minds. Leave us open to the things that you have for us. I ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Joel, for opening our program in a good way. And for your reminder that we are called to both work and prayer, that those work together, and through that, God may bring change quickly. Now I'd like to introduce our keynote presenter for today. Josh Wallace is a pastor, church planter, and lecturer in religion and culture at St. Thomas More in College in Saskatoon. He leads Backyard Church, a house church in Saskatoon, having previously pastored Warman Mennonite Church and served as a regional church minister for Mennonite Church Saskatchewan. He loves the Bible and talking together about how God is still working in our towns, neighborhoods, and around the world. Josh.
I woke up early to drive down here today from Saskatoon, so if it already feels like midday to me, I'm very grateful to KAIROS Prairies North for the invitation to be part of your gathering. To Nick, who extended to me, Laura, for the kind introduction. Oh, thank you, Nick. I hope I can live up to it. And I also want to say good morning to those joining us virtually, trying to look at the camera. It's lovely that you chose also to be part of this conversation. As I've mentioned, I have made my home in and around Saskatoon in Treaty 6 territory for the past 13 years. And as I've done so, I've learned more and more that I live there in the astounding commitment from the Cree, Dene, Soto, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis peoples. A commitment to relationship and mutuality, even in the aftermath and ongoing present of settler colonialism. I have to say that I am eager as a new immigrant to Canada from the States originally, to join in this work of pursuing just and life-sustaining ways of relating. And I'm thankful, Joe, for you getting us, helping us begin today's gathering, listening, sharing, and conversation in a way that helps us to honor all the relationships that we hold and that hold us. As was mentioned, I am a pastor of a small conversation-based church that meets on Sunday afternoons out in my backyard, at least until it gets too chilly and then we move inside. It's usually around October, especially that first snowfall. Our little backyard church is especially welcoming those around the edges of faith, while also drawing us one and all into deeper following and action with Jesus in ways that are faithful to the Anabaptist focus on communal, socially engaged discipleship. As I also teach sessionally at St. Thomas More at USask, and I work alongside and sometimes on behalf of the larger family of congregations that is Mennonite Church Saskatchewan. As we get going, I should also mention, if you haven't noticed, that I'm wearing a mask. It's not that I'm sick, it's that I have members in my family who are on immune suppressing drugs. So I have to be careful about what I bring back home to them. Whatever sniffles I might catch could quickly lead to major illness or complications for them. So my family masks up in public. If you can't hear me clearly, if you can't hear me clearly, let me know. I grew up in a Baptist church. I know how to speak and preach louder. I can slow down if need be. Just put up a hand and say, Josh, we can't hear you. Thank you for your kindness and your flexibility in helping me to care for vulnerable people. whom I cherish and care for. I am deeply thankful for the call that was originally given by Pope Francis, that's now been reaffirmed by Pope Leo, to Jubilee. I am thankful for how this has re-enlivened the work of international debt cancellation. It's deepened our awareness as we think more deeply about ecological debt and how our current global order seizes more than we can repay from the land and from our neighbors. And how to spark the Turn Debt into Hope campaign. I first heard about the Turn Debt into Hope campaign, I believe, from the folks at St. Thomas More College Campus Ministry and the Just Youth Group, which I think hearing stuff from youth is maybe always the best way to hear from it. Either from the youth or the elders, right? They're carrying signs and materials from Development Peace, passing them out to us. I've also been gratified by the way so many other ecclesial bodies, interfaith groups, other people of goodwill have joined into this. I remember coming upon the waves made by the 2000 Jubilee debt cancellation campaign, perhaps a decade or more into this century. And I hope and I trust that this current Turn Debt into Hope campaign will similarly make wide-reaching waves. This morning, I hope to ground us, to turn us to the ground, both the earth, the land, as the sustaining basis of the work for Jubilee, for the freeing of debts and the restoring of participation in the abundant goodness richness of the world that God has made. As I do so, I want to invite you first to grow quiet with me for a moment and make space for prayer. Do, generous God, creator, liberator, sustainer, add to your abundant gifts to us courage, so that we might challenge the structures and powers that accumulate and hoard, coerce, enthrall, control. Give to strength to our work, so that in the energy of your spirit, we may struggle for a world where every person and community flourishes within your generous abundance. Breathe in us and through us your fire winds of hope, till our hearts burn for justice in love. Hold us close to your heart, steadying us in the rest and rhythm of your breath, that we may labor as those filled by the sure hope of your studied goodness and generosity. Amen. I want to begin today with 3 texts, and only one of these is from Scripture. There will be more Scripture. I am a Bible preacher who came up in a Bible church with a love for both pondering and exegeting the text. But first, these 3. Let's see if I can make this thing fun. Is it this one? This one? Nope.
It should be on. Nope.
I think we can turn my first slide. Don't know if I'm succeeding at it.
No.
There we go. Thank you. These are lyrics from the musician Sarah Sparks' recent 2023 nighttime hymn, "In the Arms of God We Sleep." It's a simple song. He who made the sun to rise has caused the same sun to set. He who made the day from night has set apart a time to rest. He has made his creatures all to feel our hunger, thirst, and need. As we close our eyes each night, we prove again our God is King. Many are our troubles here. By our own strength, we have no peace. Sweet is the rest of God's children, born in the arms of God. we sleep. I offer this beautiful song with awareness and some apology for the masculinist language for God. I recommend the Liturgist 2014 song, God Our Mother, for a gender balanced hymn that expresses some of similar thoughts, the beautiful reworking of the Lord's Prayer. Born in the arms of God, we sleep. Second text. Selections from Psalm 104, a hymn praising the God who creates and sustains. The Lord made the moon for the seasons. The sun knows the place of its setting. You appoint darkness, and it becomes night, in which all the beasts of the forest prowl about. The young lions roar after their prey and seek their food from God. When the sun rises, they withdraw and lie down in their dens. Then humans go forth to their work and to labor until evening. They all wait for you to give them their food in proper time. You give to them, they gather it up. You open your hand, they are satisfied with good things. You hide your face, they are dismayed. You take away their breath, they expire and return to dust. You send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. Let the glory of the Lord endure forever. Let the Lord be glad in his works. And finally, a refrain that I pray almost every night with my daughter. It's drawn from 24/7 Prayers Lectio 365 app. A beautiful daily prayer app that leads us in nighttime in the process of examine. We conclude it each night by praying together, in peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. God of all seasons, the sun has set, the night has gathered in. My soul sinks slowly into your rest, trusting now in the resurrection to come. Amen. 3 nighttime texts. Now, my goal is not to lull us all back to sleep. Thankfully, we have coffee, God's great gift to humans of caffeine, also tea. Instead, I want to point us to the heart of Jubilee, which lies in rest in and restoration to God's sure and abundant goodness. I hope maybe you heard that in those 3 texts. I've picked nighttime texts because, well, in the rush and drive of my daytime, I don't have too much space for awareness of God's steady and sure goodness. I tend to run from project to project, from carting kids to and from school to finalizing lecture notes and responding to student emails. My goodness, AI makes grading miserable. Remembering to schedule meetings for committees and working groups, remembering to pick up milk or eggs so that we have them in the refrigerator, slugging back that coffee or tea to keep me caffeinated and hydrated a little bit. There are gatherings and vigils to organize, a sermon to write, slipping in time to parent, sending overdue texts to friends, remembering to call my dad or my mom, unloading and reloading the dishwasher. There's not much space for rest, for awareness of God's rest. Maybe some of us can relate. See nods. You can substitute in your own list of meetings and emails and household responsibilities. And maybe we have some fragments of time for passion projects or forward planning. But there are 2 moments in my day that do return to the rest of God. There's that morning prayer that I slip in before I have to wake my children for school. And then at night, in those moments as my mind quiets into sleep. In my rushing and working, all of it, or at least much of it, is needed and good work for the sake of love and care for others in the world. But in that rush, I easily forget that I am held. I easily forget that my goal is not to maximize my time, my effect, my efficiency, and so on. But instead, I am held in the abundant goodness of God, held in God's hands, held in God's economy of abundance. And my goal is to participate in that abundance and to clear pathways of barriers so that others can share in that same rest too. And only perhaps at night when my working and striving is still, do I remember this. Rest. But also, I don't know if you've heard, but the world is on fire. And you don't sleep through a fire alarm. The world is on fire. The world is being strip mined and poisoned. We're sucking up oil and spewing death sentences into the air. I mean, I did so even as I drove from Saskatoon to Regina to be here this morning. Land is scarred and stolen, filled with the blood, grief, and genocide. Nation takes up sword against nation. We murder in the name of our pension plans. Although we're not quite sure what we're doing because disinformation and distraction is pumped out by troll farms and AI slop engines. We're gathered here today in part because of that fire, because of the state of the world. Here are some statistics from the Turn Debt into Hope campaign. Hopefully you have seen these, maybe in the pamphlets scattered around or maybe online. But we live in a world where 54 countries are now facing a debt crisis with 46% of their debt owned by private creditors, where more than 3.3 billion people live in countries where more is spent on debt repayment than on essential services, where wealthy corporations and countries, including Canada, I recently became a citizen, so I feel like I can, I'm caught up in that. Though we're my other country, the US, we got our problems too. Amen? Where wealthy corporations and countries exploit resources from those other nations that are heavily indebted and from indigenous communities, and it causes human rights violations and ecological harm. Where that ecological debt from climate change and resource extraction leaves behind devastated bioregions, pollution, and communities. Again, these are all taken from the Turn Debt into Hope campaign, some from KAIROS's emails about the campaign. And we know here that this chain of global debt, that is just one lens through which we can view the raw and prolonged suffering of a world that is bound in unjust structures and imaginations. We taste this, it is bitter in our mouths, in our hearts. And it's not only in the stat sheets from KAIROS or Development and Peace or MCC or sociologists or political commentators. We taste it much closer to home too, right? Right in our own skin. I know this ache, this wrong in my own befuddlement about how to or whether to be present to the guy who's been sleeping rough in the park that I walk through to take my kids to school. I know things are not abundantly good, that I am not held in rest in the burnout stories of friends who work in healthcare or education or ministry. I know it too in the stories of my neighbors in my old town, Chicago, where ICE agents lurk outside of schools to steal parents after they drop off their kids, or wait outside of Mass at St. Jerome's around the corner from my old apartment to pick up people when they leave church. Even in all my white settler male privilege, I know at the level of my cells that things are not right, not abundantly good. Can I rest? Can I sleep through that? How can I hold myself back from screaming, just nonstop, day and night until someone notices, until things are made right? God, if you claim to hold all things, It seems like a lot is slipping through your fingers. God, if you offer abundance for all, I don't know, it seems like there's some kind of bug in the machine where life chances and stability are being diverted to some and to not others, where goodness in life is being hoarded and transmuted into luxury and tools of coercion and control. I began this morning with a prayer, riffing on words from one provided by the Turn Debt campaign. Oh God, help us understand that we have the power and the duty to act against this injustice. Grant us courage to challenge the structures that perpetuate these conditions. How can you sleep through a fire alarm? But then there's also that voice. It's a familiar voice saying, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You want to hear those words before? Yeah. Come to Jesus for rest and easy yoke. Is he inviting me to close my eyes to the pains of so much suffering, to the heartache and terror of others? Is this the opium for the masses? A wish dream? A fideistic optimism, that the simpering faith that it will all be right by and by? I've been up here shouting for a while now. I want to give you a chance, an intermission in my preaching, to turn to one or two people next to you. If you're on Zoom, breakout rooms, we can spend maybe 5 minutes. And I want you to respond to that tension that I suspect we hear. We'll get more into scripture and some of the Bible afterwards about Jubilee. But this yoke of rest that Jesus offers, where do you feel it pinch or chafe in the midst of your awareness of so many crises and injustice facing us and our neighbors? Is that an okay topic for us to talk about around our tables for 4 or 5 minutes? Okay, and Nick, I can trust you to put people in Zoom rooms?
Kevin's gonna take care of that, yep.
Okay, there you go. Okay, I'll call us back together in like 4-ish minutes. Okay, and you'll pull our attention back together. Are there 1 or 2 people, either in the room or maybe also from online, who'd like to share just a couple of thoughts that came up at your table? You would like to share with the larger group? Or maybe we need more coffee before we're into large group sharing mode.
The chat, I put it up there. Well, Josh, something that came up at our table is being grateful for the moments of joy and rest that we can lean into, and sometimes they take us by surprise, and be grateful for those. And then we also talked a bit about kind of the corollary of the pinch being that when we really want to lean in to responses to the crises you're talking about, that by leaning very far in, we can actually harm ourselves, and we have to set boundaries to take care of ourselves. So there's a pinch there about how you want to be all out and committed and all in to respond, but you have to take care of yourself too, and that feels like a pinch.
I'm grateful for the wisdom of boundaries that you made there, and that interplay of both caring for ourselves and caring for others. One more comment from another group, either here in the room or online. Okay, I'm gonna pull us back together. I don't want to, before I finish, say a few comments about the tradition of Jubilee and its roots in rest. Now, the concept of Jubilee is drawn from Leviticus 25. I actually have it here on the next slide. That's kind of small text. It's named for the ram's horn and shofar that was sounded to herald a year of liberty. I know Leviticus is everyone's favorite book, right? Right up there with like 2nd Chronicles. But in Leviticus 25, we have this declaration of every generation a loosing of debts. this is a thread that runs from here in Leviticus 25 through to Jesus' great Nazareth manifesto in Luke 4. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He's quoting there from Isaiah 61 and Isaiah 42. And even beyond that, into the New Testament, the church of Acts 2, and Paul's exhortation to generosity and mutuality in 2 Corinthians 8. But this first mention of Jubilee in Leviticus is in the world of the story set in the shadow of empire. The shadow of Egypt's empire of debt slavery. Well, you probably remember the Hebrews were enslaved by the Pharaoh of Egypt, and God called Moses to go down and say, let my people go. But do we remember that Egypt's political economy and economic imagination were both so tied to enslaving others and tied initially to debt? Even our Hebrew Bibles, we have this story told. In the Joseph narrative in Genesis 41, in the midst of severe famine, the people of Egypt and those who have fled there for refuge are forced to sell themselves into perpetual debt slavery to be doled out survival rations from Pharaoh's granaries. Pharaoh's political economy, it gobbled up the land, extracted and hoarded resources, and it utilized those resources as power over others. What were the enslaved Hebrews doing in Exodus chapter 1? They were building store cities for Pharaoh's extracted surplus. Many Bible scholars hold that these Torah narratives and laws were first written down in something like the current, were first written down as we have them now in the shadow of another empire, Babylon. In the 6th century BCE, when many of the Judahite people, especially their elites, were forced to march to Babylon to live as a subjugated servant underclass, marginalized and displaced. Can you hear how that instruction to release, grounded in God's goodness, grounded in the pattern of Sabbath and rest, presents a counter ethic, a counter vision for society? As we read in Leviticus 25, liberty granted throughout the land, return to ancestral homes on the land, rest from extraction from the land, no sowing or harvesting, dependence on God's goodness abundantly given through the land. And as we track further into Leviticus 25, elimination of debt sales of the land, because land is ultimately a gift from God, not a possession. Elimination of bond slaves sold due to debt. We could read more and more, but we find that this all ties back to the original blessing of land and people through the Sabbath, through rest. The Jubilee represents the Sabbath of Sabbaths, the seventh year, the seventh cycle of the 7th year when land and people were rested. And it is that to which God calls us in our Jubilee work. He offers us to be grounded there. We'd love to spend more time in this passage. As you can tell, I love to talk about scripture, but I see we have more to do. Can I leave you with a word of blessing? Looking upon so much goodness, beauty, joy, and love. God, in your hands we rest. In the loving hands, God, confident and bold that God's blessings surely fill earth as they do heaven. May God, your will for abundance, your kingdom of generosity be done on earth as it is in heaven. Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you, Josh. And what I take away from that is just that the rest that we work for the land and for people burdened with debt, that rest is for us too. Now I will be turning the MC duties over to Amanda Dodge. She is the program director for Mennonite Central Committee, Saskatchewan, and has served on the KAIROS Prairies North Coordinating Committee since May 2021 in the role of secretary. And can I share with you a bit of what you shared at our table? Amanda mentioned that she is herself a burnout survivor, and that stems from her passionate work for justice. So welcome, Amanda.
I appreciate Josh's comment about the boundaries in this work. But it's wonderful to be with all of you this morning, and this is our last morning session. Sharing stories from across the KAIROS Prairies North region. And so this is the business meeting component of this annual gathering, but don't worry, we're going to spice it up, add some flavor to it. I'm going to start with a few introductory comments and then we'll get into the stories. So KAIROS is a nationwide ecumenical collective that works together in faithful action towards ecological justice and human rights. And folks who are active in KAIROS's work are either organized in a local group, like KAIROS Regina, a thematic group like the decolonization group, or are individuals who engage in the wider work of KAIROS and or KAIROS related work. So all of these folks find themselves in countrywide regions, and ours is KAIROS Prairies North, which, as Laura spoke to beautifully in earlier today, encompasses the treaty territories that are represented in the provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Northwest Territories. So each region has a coordinating committee, which serves to support and oversee the KAIROS activity in each region, to facilitate area-wide events like this annual gathering, and to maintain communication among the groups and the folks in the region. So our coordinating committee is currently made up of myself, two folks who are on the screen. I'll ask them to wave insofar as they're able, Javid Summers and Kevin Gunther Troutwin. There we go, you see their small waving hands. And also Magdalena Bukes is a member of our group. Now in this hour, we're going to be hearing from folks engaged in the work of KAIROS. We'll be hearing their stories about their activities over this past year. We're going to hear a very brief, we promise, very brief financial report from Javid. He doesn't like the spotlight. They are short reports. And then we'll hear about national KAIROS initiatives and activities from Shannon, including the Jubilee campaign. And then we'll close our session by speaking a bit to our work as a coordinating committee and inviting you to consider joining us. So let's begin with the stories. We're going to start with Dan Beveridge, who will be reporting on behalf of KAIROS Regina. And Dan is a KAIROS elder, and we're grateful to welcome him.
Thanks, Amanda, and let me add my welcome to those you've already heard. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was no KAIROS Canada and no KAIROS Regina. In 2001, over 10 Canadian ecumenical coalitions, including 10 Days for World Development, came together to form KAIROS. 10 days refers to the first 10 days of February 1973, when 5 national Canadian church bodies, starting with the letters P, L, U, R, and A, came together, and their leaders crossed Canada, promoting education and action on poverty and other international development issues. In Regina, the local 10 Days group formed in 1974 and later renamed 10 Days for Global Justice, with some folks from Plura, became KAIROS Regina. We were one of several local KAIROS groups on the prairies who began meeting together for annual gatherings, in person, of course, hosted by the groups alternatively in Alberta and Saskatchewan, Edmonton, Calgary, Lethbridge, Saskatoon, Swift Current, Fort Capel, and Regina. This loose network was named KAIROS Prairies North. In time, many of these local groups became inactive. KAIROS Regina in 2016 also decided if we needed to take a break. But in mid-2019, with the help of Shannon Neufeldt of KAIROS National Staff, we became rejuvenated with some new faces, some here today. Our group meets monthly via Zoom. Average attendance is about 7. Currently, most members live in Regina, 1 in Saskatoon, Past included, faith connections certainly, currently include Roman Catholic, United Church, Unitarian, and Mennonite. And in the past, we've had Lutheran and Anglican and others. We normally have one major program each year. In 2021, we launched the climate change conversation modules of the For the Love of Creation program being promoted by KAIROS Regina, or KAIROS Canada, pardon me. In 2022, we offered creation care in our places of prayer, energy retrofits, and other faith-based climate action as a hybrid in-person Zoom event. In January 2024, our hybrid event was heat pumps in Saskatchewan, what you should know. That was really very well attended. Inspired by the For the Love of Creation program, several of us created a climate change conversation group at Harmony United Church in Regina in September 24. Remember Roma? We continue to meet monthly in person and via Zoom with about 7 attending. In February 2025, KAIROS Regina offered a Jubilee brainstorming session addressing ecological debt in the Jubilee year. The workshop dealt with the background of Jubilee, the 2025 campaign and petition, and what could be done to promote it. We hope to encourage churches to engage in the Jubilee campaign and petition. The attendance of 16 were actually mainly individuals who were personally invited. 2 of us had a petition signing at our church in March, resulting in 31 signatures. As individuals, we have links with other community groups and organizations and attend numerous events. One member also participated in the Canadian government's climate finance consultations in July 2024, led by the Canadian Food Grains Bank. KAIROS Regina is actively involved in planning and hosting this event. KAIROS Prairies North and Regina. And we'll hope there'll be many more. Thank you.
Again, I'm pleased to welcome up Hélène Tremblay-Boyko, who's going to be sharing on behalf of the Decolonization Group, as well as the Treaty Land Sharing Network. And I think Luke Wanick will be joining her online. Welcome, Hélène.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
The Decolonization Working Group had its origins, at an online event in November 21st of 2020, embracing Indigenous rights, bringing life to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which heard from speakers like Michelle Brass, Sonia Eggerman, Marianne Morrison, and among the approximately 100 attendees, those who wanted to pursue follow-up action on UNDRIP and Indigenous justice were invited to sign up for a subgroup of the KAIROS Prairies North regional membership. Over the ensuing years, we have hosted 8 more educational events, 4 of which were held online and 4 on the land. We are thrilled to see that as we gain momentum, the attendance at our events continues to increase. We are committed to dismantling colonialism with the goal of facilitating educational conversations among settlers from primarily Christian faith communities about decolonization and systemic discrimination in order to equip attendees to advocacy and action. We want to create space to center Indigenous voices and unsettle settlers. A goal of this work is a personal transformation, which moves us toward restorative solidarity with Indigenous peoples. During that time, our membership has evolved. I became involved in 2022, following the Healing Haunted Histories event on Muskeg Lake Cree Nation. I was immediately impressed by the dedication to advocacy and engagement in education and solidarity that I found among the other members of the group. Currently, our veteran members include Amanda Dodge, Javed Summers, and Jordan Cantwell, as well as a couple of our members who are currently on hiatus. More recent members include Mike LeBlanc, Jose Luis Moraga Diaz, and Luke Wanek. All of our activities have been relationally based. We connect with and reach out to folks in our networks and communities. We are led by Indigenous advisors who identify event topics and guide the planning of all our events. Most recently, we have been blessed with the collaboration of the Treaty Land Sharing Network in the person of Luke Wanek, who was instrumental in connecting us with the leadership at Blue Quills First Nations University, where this past summer's event was held. Over 80 people attended the Decolonizing Ourselves residential school tour and our Future in Treaty, our inaugural Alberta-based event. And if Luke is there he is, I will let him continue.
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah. Thanks for the invitation to this this event here, and glad to be part of it. Yeah, so my name's Luke Wanek. I live in Edmonton, Muskogee-Waskahikan Treaty 6 territory. I was born in Winnipeg and kind of raised in Calgary, so I've been on the prairies my whole life. And yeah, I guess over the last few years I've been volunteering on the coordinating committee with the Treaty Land Sharing Network. And basically, I know Ellen through the Treaty Land Sharing Network. Her and her partner Al are members, landholder members, and so Ellen reached out to me about interest in doing a KAIROS event in Alberta this past year. Yeah, they'd done some in Saskatchewan before, a decolonizing event, and wanting those relationships that Helen was talking about, of making sure that they're doing it in a good way and sort of meshing with community needs and interests and everything. And yeah, I happen to be working with some nations that are help to manage Blue Quills University, like including Saddle Lake Cree Nation, northeast to Edmonton, a bit west of St. Paul, and they really expressed their interest in sharing their story, Blue Quills University story, a former residential school, which in 1971 was basically through Indigenous activism and peaceful protest was transitioned into Indigenous management and has been an Indigenous-led post-secondary institution ever since. And wanting to share that story of how that space has been literally transformed through this process. And then also interested in sharing about treaty and its importance. Yeah, that was something that mattered a lot to them. And so we worked together to create this event, which was held this past September at Blue Quills. And yeah, sponsored by the United Church as well as the Presbyterian Church. So we're really grateful for that. And yeah, Blue Quills is about a couple hour drive from Edmonton, which is the main population center. But despite that, as Helen said, we had 80 participants showed up. It was a beautiful day, gathered outside. And we had treating teachings from Elder Diana Steinhauer and tours of Blue Quills with survivors Paul McQuinney and Louis Lapatak. And yeah, it was just I was so grateful that we could be outside, that so many people showed up. It was very inspiring to have that kind of interest in this topic and people to make that drive out for this. And yeah, it just felt very important to be outside, kind of spiritually connecting to the land. And the teachings that were shared by Diana about treaty were really beautiful and important. And then to get that history of Blue Quills University and then how it's been transformed. The former white dark walls have been covered with Indigenous art and stuff. And I just want to leave you with this quote here of an anonymous participant on their experience of particularly Diana Steinhauer's teachings. Her song, Diana Steinhauer's song, "To Begin Us with Such a Gift. I felt like the trees were leaning in to listen or moving in the wind with the song. Her teaching stories were a pathway into treaty that were a profound contrast to the cede and surrender English clauses imposed on the treaties. Yeah, so I'll just leave you there. Thanks.
Thank you, Luke.
Found some pictures of me. Yeah.
I'd like to express our deep gratitude for the invaluable time and knowledge that you've provided, as well as the long-lasting relationships which have been forged. As you step away from our group to pursue your studies, we wish you well and look forward to working with you again in the future. Finally, I wish to extend a heartfelt invitation to any of you here to join our work at the Decolonization Working Group. We really need many, many more hands. We meet once a month online, or when we're right close to planning an event, maybe a few more times than that. But most of the planning work is online. And if you're near one of the events, we hope to have representation at those events. Can I move into treaty land? Okay. So the Treaty Land Sharing Network, Luke, I'm not sure how much you wanted to participate in this, but it is a grassroots initiative that began in Saskatchewan and has since expanded into Alberta. It aims to connect farmers, ranchers, and other landholders with First Nations and Métis people who need access to land for cultural practices, such as gathering plants, hunting, fishing, and conducting ceremonies. The network is committed to honoring the spirit and intent of treaties by sharing land for mutual benefit and fostering respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, working to make it safer and easier for Indigenous people to access land, to practice their way of life in the prairies, and engaging in ongoing learning about our shared histories and responsibilities as treaty people living on these lands. During treaty negotiations, Indigenous nations agreed to share the land with settlers, not to cede or surrender it. As part of these sacred commitments to live together in peace, take care of shared lands, and ensure one another's well-being, Indigenous people were guaranteed that their way of life would be protected, that they would be able to move freely throughout their territories and continue to relate to the land through their own laws, practices, and protocols. Guiding principles for Treaty Land Sharing Network: Indigenous peoples both hold inherent treaty rights to move freely throughout these territories and to use and steward the plants and animals and these lands. Access to land is critical for the cultural survival and livelihood of Indigenous peoples. As treaty people, settlers have a responsibility to share the land that they currently steward and actively work to remove barriers to safe land access. And it is critical for settlers to engage in ongoing learning together to deepen their practice of treaty relationship, even when this work requires them to set aside their own ways of doing things, challenge their perceptions, and feel uncomfortable. The public launch of Treaty Land Sharing Network was in July of 2021. There's a website where all landowners can list their land, or landholders, shall I say. And so that makes it possible for Indigenous people to access it. And your land is listed under the different items that you may allow. And so it could be hunting, it could be that it is a heritage site, it could be collecting native plants or sweat rocks. It could be that you have large tracts of trees, bush, wetlands, etc. There are certain land use protocols. When you sign up as a landholder, you receive some signage that you can post, and it displays the phone number. Most land users will call ahead, and often before each visit when they return. Since we joined, my husband and I, who's sitting back there, in 2023, we have welcomed mostly moose hunters, but one couple came in search of medicinal plants. And since we have active pasture land, we ask that they leave the gates open or closed as they find them. And in our circumstances, since we have not had land users access cropland, there has not been any restriction accessing the land with vehicles. Just in 2024, the Treaty Land Sharing Network was expanded into Alberta. And Luke, can you tell us on whose land that was?
It was Brenda Bomer's land, so a farmer just east of Camrose. And yeah, for that event too, we had about 80 people show up.
The current status is that Treaty Land Sharing Network has 70 locations and over 45,000 acres in both Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories. 3/4 of the locations accessed in the past year, or have been accessed in the past year, and most have been accessed multiple times. Land sharing experiences have been overwhelmingly positive. So if you would like to get involved, there is the website there. You can become involved as a landholder, providing land, or a land user who is interested in continuing with traditional habits, traditional activities. You can also become involved by donating to the organization at the same website. And that's all I have, unless you have something to add, Luke.
I think you did a great job there, Helen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ellen. We now have some stories from Edmonton, and we have Haley Bukansky on the Zoom call who will start for us. And then Kevin will have a report to share. So perhaps you two could just do that back to back. Haley, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed listening to everyone so far, and I was at the Land Sharing Network event that happened in Alberta, and it was super awesome. So it was nice to hear that. Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Strengthening Voices for a Just Transition project that I partook in. I was actually hoping to come to Regina for this, but things just kept not working out. So I did the project with 2 other girls, super awesome. They were also not able to make it today. So I'll just kind of give a rundown of how it went. So yeah, the Strengthening Voices project kind of had 2 main parts. The first one was nationally, we did international community forums. I took part in the one in Edmonton, and there we discussed like diverse approaches and perspectives about a just transition. And then secondly, from there, we had the cohort of young adults who were like nurtured to advocate for the just transition, actually go out into the world and advocate for it in a variety of domains. As you'll see later, we ended up talking with some elected officials. So just to start off, I'll talk about KAIROS's definition of a just transition, just so we're on the same page. So I just took this right off the website. I'll start. The energy transition is inevitable and already underway, but how will we ensure that workers and communities affected by the transition are supported properly? How will we ensure that the energy development respects Indigenous rights and the natural environment? How will we ensure that jobs in the low carbon economy will be available to all, including those previously marginalized by the fossil fuel sector? How will we ensure that the low carbon economy supports equity and ecological integrity? Transitioning the economy away from fossil fuel dependence is critical to address the climate crisis, which is fueling intersectional disasters such as extreme weather events, drought, and conflict, just to name a few. We cannot maintain the status quo of unlimited growth, extraction, and settler colonialism, those which got us into this mess. We have an opportunity to take a different path, to set into motion deep transformation towards a life-giving economy and ensure that no one is left behind. That is what a just transition is all about. So that's that was our guiding principle for a just transition in this project. So yeah, as I was talking nationally, we had those community forums. There was 2 in our area. So there's one in Saskatoon and in Edmonton. Yeah, so I was part of the planning community for the Edmonton Day, which was really great because we had groups from all over Edmonton come. We had Seniors for Climate Action. We had Beth Lorimer from KAIROS. all these other groups came out, anyone who had, you know, some sort of interest in what a just transition might look like. And in Edmonton, we were super fortunate to have Melina Lubicon, who is a personal hero of mine. She's the founder of Sacred Earth Solar and has started sort of these energy sovereignty projects in First Nations across the country now, helping finance and figure out how to put forward low carbon solutions like solar and wind. So that's pretty cool. I was really happy to see her there. I was like, oh my gosh, she's a hero. But the forum was super cool because we did have those diverse perspectives, positionalities, and like I said, just tons of different community groups like labor, migration, yeah, like you name it. And after that, then we did we started doing the actual advocacy work. So we had, for the youth, the young adult cohort, we had 8 Zoom sessions where we heard from a variety of guest speakers like internationally, which was really cool. They kind of focused on things from like, what does advocacy look like, to those actual organizational skills. And it was really cool as well, because on one of these forums we had Indigenous Climate Action speak, which is a local group, or it started locally. It's national now. And yeah, we had Willow speaking from ICA, Indigenous Climate Action, talking just about what a just transition looks like from an Indigenous perspective. And that was really awesome. I felt that really set the tone for the sessions. After that, we got together, we brainstormed, we were like, who are we going to talk to? Who are we going to try to advocate and talk to about the actual just transition issues that we want to get across to? So we had reached out to many politicians, both municipally and provincially. And on my end, I had, unfortunately at the time, a UCP MLA who just was ghosting me, didn't really want to hear from anything. But we did hear back from some Ranchi Pancholi, who's an NDP constituent, the MLA for somewhere in South Edmonton. So we were able to talk with her, and we talked to her about just transition and what that can look like from the NDP's program, right? So that was really cool. And then, yeah, we wrapped up the program officially with the webinar in February 2025, which if you want, I can put a link in the chat too. But overall, the process was really revealing and eye-opening. Like, aside from, you know, some of the sourpuss UCP MLAs, my experiences taking from the forums and just talking like about the project and community anecdotally, especially with like elected municipal officials, is that people are really worried and people do want change. And even if people might not have the right wording for a just transition, or they might not have that concept in their head, people see the value in sort of taking an equitable approach to climate action, right? So making sure that everybody's voices are represented and heard, and like we said, that justice framework. I also always remember the forum in Edmonton, and because there was literally like someone from every different group in the room, which I thought was really awesome. And it's kind of a rare experience, at least in Edmonton, I think right now, just because everyone's so busy. So it felt like people were really intentionally there. And yeah, it's definitely something I'll remember and take forward into my experiences going forward. I'm really grateful to be part of the project. So yeah, if you have any questions, I can take them, but otherwise that's.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm going to try to quickly share a screen and make sure it works. I'll change my screen halfway through the presentation, but for now, that worked. Yes. So I am a member of KAIROS Prairies North, the coordinating committee, but I am sharing a report for SCAN Edmonton. SCAN stands for Seniors for Climate Action Now. And I just wanted to quickly sort of show you a little bit of their website as I read the beginning of the report that Tylene gave me. You can see this here, and you'll of course be able to go find it for yourself later. SCAN is a national organization of seniors demanding the immediate transition of renewable energy and an end to the use of extraction of fossil fuels. SCAN advocates for both climate and social justice and follows the leadership of Indigenous-led groups, uplifts the voice of youth, and joins in solidarity with many other climate, environmental, health, public service, and social justice organizations to fight for a society and world that meets the needs of all people and our planet. SCAN Edmonton is a chapter of SCAN and the first chapter in Western Canada. SCAN is a part of a coalition of seniors groups from across Canada called Seniors for Climate. And together they held a national-wide event in the fall, and it was a great success. So they decided to host Earth Day this spring as the next national event. When SCAN Edmonton hosted that, they decided to host it on April 26th between 12:30 and 4:30 at the Alberta Avenue Community League, which is located on 118th Ave in Edmonton. So you can see a few of the photos from the day. They had a great event. Their event ran from 12:30 to 4:30, and they began with a welcome table. They had a program that included Lloyd Cardinal, a local leader here in Edmonton, 4 drummers and singers with smudge, prayer, song, drumming. Some of their speakers came from the Edmonton Coalition on Housing and Homelessness, from the New Grocery Movement, from Edmonton Youth for Climate, from the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment, from the Keepers of the Water, that's a group that some of us know here at KAIROS, from the Alberta Environmental Network, from Climate Justice Edmonton, and even a city councillor, Michael Jantz. There was also, as you can see, a photo of the performance from the Raging Grannies. They had activities from about 2 until 4 of a round dance, Edmonton Fiddlers, the Keepers of the Water provided some activities, and there were many tables and green innovations going on for people to explore and learn about. Approximately 400 people attended this event, and they enjoyed indoor and outdoor activities. And it was one of 75 Seniors for Climate Earth Day events that took place across Canada that day. SCAN Edmonton just wants to express that they appreciate the donation of $200 from KAIROS, and the funding that we provided as KAIROS was used to provide the honoraria and protocol of tobacco for the Indigenous knowledge keepers, performers, and speakers. So that is a little bit of the update from SCAN Edmonton.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin and Haley and Tylee. The sharing stories is definitely a highlight for us at every annual gathering. And I think what we hear is that while the struggle for peace and justice is hard, there are so many glimpses of beauty and connection along the way that really sustain us and hearten us. So wonderful to hear. Now we have the promised short financial report from Javed. So over to you, Javed.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. I have a little bit of a slide here I'll share. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so as Amanda said, my name is Javed Summers, and I have been part of the coordinating committee for KAIROS Prairies North, well, as long as Kevin and Amanda. So I think that's something like 4.5 years. And yeah, I live in Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory. I worship at First Presbyterian Church, and my day job is I'm an accountant with the federal government. I'm very passionate about dismantling colonialism and striving towards relationships between Canada and First Nations that are based in treaty. And so volunteering with the coordinating committee is one aspect of that work for me. So happy to do that and happy to be the treasurer. And yeah, I just, it's not that I don't want the spotlight. It's just that I think this information is less exciting than some other things we're talking about today. But I'll run through this very quickly. So just to give you a sense of what we do on the coordinating committee in terms of managing money. So the reality is we actually don't have a lot of money, and we don't need a lot of money because mostly we're working, we're all working as volunteers, and so most of the work we do isn't costing anything. But there is a bank account that I manage, and KAIROS National is good enough to support us with an annual grant. This year it was $2,000, and that allows us to do the things we need to do. So Kevin alluded to the fact that we were able to sponsor the SCAN event with a little bit of money there, $200 this year. So that was great. And typically every year we're able to send small sponsorships to an event in the region, if we're asked. And our major financial expense is, of course, the annual gathering, which is what we're doing right now. We also serve as the banker for the decolonization group that we heard from, and they actually raised quite a bit of money. And an event like they talked about at Blue Quills there has a lot of financial transactions associated with it. So that's actually, in terms of the transactions in our bank account, it's mostly their work that we're supporting. So that's all I have to say. Thanks for taking a couple of minutes to listen to me. Back to you,
Thank
Amanda.
you for speaking. Thank you for your report, David. Now we're going to hear, let's have applause because the treasurer worked hard and if you don't have me work hard. Thank you, David. Now we're going to have Shannon Neufeldt share on behalf of KAIROS Canada about some of the work that's happening nationally.
All right, so this is I don't know, 6-minute invitation to learn more and get engaged. Let's see if I can really do this in 6 minutes. So I want to share with you about a variety of different KAIROS programs. This afternoon, I will talk a little bit more about Jubilee, which is one that I work on very closely, but my role is member relations and network coordinator. The members are our national churches, and I work to engage those churches at all levels. And then the networks are all of you folks, and we work in programs that are 4 different pillars, and I'm going to touch on each of those 4 pillars. So the first one that I will talk about is the migrant justice pillar. Leah Schifra is our lead. She is on the left there. And she had the opportunity to attend the 69th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women in New York this year, and says that that was nothing short of transformative. There are many challenges facing women, especially women who are migrants. Yet there is an energetic and powerful community of change makers around the world leading change. If you want to read more of her reflection, you can find that on the KAIROS website. I want to just highlight a few of the ways that the Migrant Justice Program aims to center migrant voices through storytelling, education, and experiential learning activities. Here are 3 examples. The Migrant Worker Exercise, which is available to communities. A mini docu-series that you can find on the website here, Migrant Voices, Truth and Transformation. And this fall, there was a forum theater production by the Collaborative Network to End Exploitation and Mixed Company Theater that KAIROS supported. And those performances have happened already. Perhaps there will be more in the future. And to tell you a little bit about the second of 4 pillars, the Indigenous rights pillar, not that they're in any particular order, but second that I'll talk about. We have a new position at KAIROS, the Director of Indigenous Programs, and the first person in that position is Murray Pruden. We got to know Murray at our staff retreat this spring, and it was wonderful to have his grounding presence in terms of our opening each morning, standing by the waters, by the fire, on the earth. And also fairly new to KAIROS staff is a new Indigenous rights program coordinator, Randy Villado. And I'm going to leave that for later. So Brandy's been with us for about 6 months now. And one of the things is that she is a great writer and has been gracing us with teachings in the form of blogs on Indigenous History Month. There were 13 of them. You can go and check them out. They're relevant all year long. I also will note that she is working with the KAIROS Indigenous Rights Circle and is currently in Belém, Brazil for COP30 with 2 other colleagues and 4 delegates. Their bios and some information are all on that table with the green tablecloth over there. And I want to invite you to consider saying a prayer and lighting a candle. You just wander over sometime during lunch and take a look at it and think about the fact that right now, leaders from around the world are gathered in Brazil to discuss climate issues and try to come to some agreement and some solutions. And those leaders need wisdom and courage and much more. And our delegates are there to learn and to speak and to advocate, and they need our prayers. The people are marching in Brazil today. And so that is something that you could also pray for safety and effectiveness of their march today in Brazil and around the world. Another piece of the Indigenous rights program is the KAIROS blanket exercise team, which is continuing to make significant steps in implementing the fully Indigenous-led model of that program. An exciting piece of that work is that Alfredo Barahona, he's on the bottom there, landed yesterday in New Zealand to offer a world blanket exercise at the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education. I got ahead of myself there. I actually had a slide about the delegation talk, which includes Indigenous partners and Global South partners from Latin America. And then we have the Gender Justice and Global Partnerships Program. I want to share with you Danielle Kamti-Nono, the Africa Partnerships and Global Climate Justice Program Coordinator, was able to attend a gathering in Uganda recently, just a couple of weeks ago. And that is a program from the Fellowship of Christian Councils and Churches in the Great Lakes and the Horn of Africa. And I do have another piece to share with you about the Global Partnerships work. There is an exciting new program. Stay tuned after lunch, and we will have a very short video to share with you. So I will turn it back over to Amanda.
Sounds good. Thank you, Shannon. So for the last part of our session, we want to talk a bit about the work of the KAIROS Prairies North Coordinating Committee. As you heard, this coordinating committee was revived about 4.5 years ago in 2021. And what kind of work do we do? So we have restored the practice of holding these annual gatherings, which we typically do in October or November each year. And we've worked with community groups and folks to host them online, as well as in person in places like Calgary, Edmonton, and now Regina. So well done, Regina. We brought this back to Saskatchewan. And go Riders, because I want a chance to say that today. We're gonna win tomorrow, right? Yes, okay. So fantastic that KAIROS Regina has hosted us today. At the annual gatherings, we just love hearing the inspiring stories of what's happening across the region. And people say that they enjoy connecting with each other because it's heartening to connect with like-minded people, isn't it? Right? And it really sustains us in our work. And it creates space for collaboration. We've always incorporated an educational component to these annual gatherings to increase our understanding and to equip us for action. And they've generally been organized and presented by the groups. Like one year, the decolonization group presented a session called Rediscovering Treaty with the Earth. In Calgary, we've heard a session on activating hope, faith, and the climate crisis. And of course, today, Fires, Jubilee, and Coal by KAIROS Regina. The coordinating committee also initiated an e-newsletter, which we issue about once or twice a year. And the purpose of the e-newsletter is to engage like-minded people of faith into activities that are aligned with KAIROS. It's a communication piece that we use to share updates about the annual gathering and other events and initiatives happening in the region, like the ones you heard some stories about. The local groups contribute to it, and it also serves to promote upcoming events. And then the third sort of area, sort of the other activities that we do, we sponsor different initiatives happening in the region that promote KAIROS's mission. And you heard a bit about that in Javid's Treasurer report. We help to animate some of the national work of KAIROS, like the Strengthening Voices for Just Transition. And we've done some strategic planning and envisioned more ways of connecting folks across the region and encouraging more collective work, either among place-based or thematic groups. And also we've had fun. It's a fun group. They're great people to hang out with. So what's the nature of the commitment for those of us on the coordinating committee and those who would like to join us? It's not a heavy commitment. We meet online for an hour a month. And you, depending on your role in the committee, you could have additional work on top of that. Like as the secretary, I help organize the newsletter, Javed, the finances, and so on. And if you're involved in planning the annual gathering, that would require some more time, but it's pretty light lift as far as committees go. In terms of our particular roles, there's kind of 4 executive roles, if you will: the convener, the secretary, the treasurer, and the national rep. And we also, of course, have general members. So people can serve on the committee and not take on a particular role. Currently, I'm serving as secretary and Javed as treasurer, as you heard. And we have 2 vacant positions. They're opportunities to serve. And so I'll ask Shannon to speak a bit about the national rep role, and then it'll be over to Kevin to speak about the convener role.
We have 5 regions across Canada, and we ask each of those regions to choose or appoint a national rep, so that when staff are looking to get in touch with folks, we don't always have to talk to the whole committee. We have one person. And so that person has opportunities in different ways to come together. And so we gather those 5 reps, usually a few times a year on a Zoom call. And in the past, there were also opportunities to come to in-person meetings. It is still yet to be seen whether we can revive that post-pandemic.
And then Kevin's going to speak to the convener role, which is an opportunity to serve, as well as share a bit about like the meaning of the committee and being engaged in it. Take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah, so I did previously serve as the convener, and so I got to talk about that. The convener role is intentionally not a chair. So if you've been on other committees before, maybe you've had a chair, but we didn't want to make this role overly burdensome in the way that a chair can be. So the convener is primarily there to call the meetings to order, to send out the notice of meetings, and to just be an inviter and gatherer to bring people together for our conversations. So practically speaking, being the convener means keeping a calendar, reading the minutes ahead of time, hopefully, not always, and setting an agenda for the meeting. And I usually do the work of that, or I did the work of that ahead of time, and then we collaboratively amend the agenda in the meeting itself. When you are the convener, or even just any member at large in this group, you get to meet interesting people from around the region who are doing amazing work. You get to become friends with the rest of the coordinating committee, and you play an important role in amplifying the work that others are already doing. As you've kind of heard this morning, some of the things, we get to amplify the work of SCAN and the decolonization group and the treaty land sharing network and so many other, the housing groups in Calgary and all the places that we've gotten to know. You also learn about new opportunities for yourself and your local community. Because we're a regional group, we're diffused, we're all over the place. And so you probably also belong to local groups. So when you hear about what's happening regionally, you as a coordinating committee member get to bring that back to your local networks and inspire them as well. So it goes both ways. There's some learning and there's some serving. You heard the story about how we came into being in 2021. And this was, of course, just at the height of online culture in the pandemic. And recently, you've probably noticed that the internet kind of sucks and that we don't, it's not fun to be on, and there's not a lot of good stuff happening. But when I think about how we came together back then, it makes me think that this is what the internet was built for. In the 90s and 80s and early 2000s, the internet was about bringing people together from far away who maybe wouldn't otherwise connect, and learning about each other and sharing experiences and building community. And the best part of that vision is what we have been able to do a little bit in the coordinating committee of KAIROS Prairies North. At the beginning, we didn't really know what we were doing, but I think we've taken some time and built some traditions that can be worked with. We've built some structure that will help support this network going forward. And so there's not a lot of that inventing work left to do for people who are able to join now. We have annual gatherings. We have especially the work of the decolonization group. And through the KAIROS Prairies North, we get to build for the future. When I was younger, growing up in the West, it felt often like I was alone. Like I didn't know where my people were who cared about faith and social justice. I kind of sometimes felt like, you know, the prophet Elijah who says, I am the only prophet left. Where are my people? But you learn that there are people hidden away in caves. There's 50 in this cave, 50 in that cave, and they're tucked away around the region. And the KAIROS Prairies North is one way that we connect people and find out that we're not the only one left. When we come together in this kind of a movement, I think it's really unique what we do here. We build something that is bigger than just our individual church, our individual denomination even. And we, even when there's only 1 or 2 of us in our city or 5 of us in our city, we can kind of function like the yeast in the dough. We can pull people out and we can be a leavening presence for folks. Lastly, I think that KAIROS offers a unique place in the social justice kind of ecosphere. We are one of the few places where you can care about faith and social justice at the same time. I think often it's tempting to be in one place where you can talk about your faith, but you don't really get to say much about your social justice commitments. Or you're in places where you can really work on your social justice commitments, but you might tone down your faith commitments. And KAIROS, I think, has the chance to share and promote both sides of that. And from lots of the participants I've talked with who've come to our events, they've found it really refreshing because we don't operate out of a spirit of fear and anxiety only. We take the crises seriously, but we also, we believe in hope. We believe in possibility, and we believe we have faith and goodwill. So there's this spirit when you come to a KAIROS gathering that might be a little bit different than some of the other gatherings. I'm going to wrap that up. I hope that Amanda will have something else to say, but thanks for listening to us. And I'm so excited to see all the people. Every year our gatherings get bigger, and it just tells me that there's a call and an appetite for this kind of work in the West.
Well, and we're wondering if there's anyone in the room today, here in Regina or in the Zoom room, who feels led to say, yeah, I'd like to join the coordinating committee. I'd like to be a part of what you're doing. We would welcome you. And as you can tell, we're kind of fun. So you would also have a good time with us. And if that's not a decision that you're ready for right now, if it's percolating with you and you later say, yeah, I would like to be a part of this work, please be in touch with us. That Shannon and I are here today. So you could come and talk with us to say that you'd be interested in joining the coordinating committee. Or you can email us. Our email address is easy to remember because it's our full name, kairosprairiesnorth@gmail.com. So we're right at we're approaching the noon hour here. And so 2 things we'd like to do. One is that I will offer grace for our noon meal. And then secondly, we'd like to take a group photo of everyone. And so I'll say grace, creator of all life. We pause in gratitude for the earth that sustains us, for the hands that have prepared the food we're about to eat, and for the communities that promote justice and peace. Bless this meal and our fellowship, that it may strengthen us for the work ahead, to seek justice for all, to care for your creation, and to walk humbly together in hope. Amen.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks, everyone who shared before lunch all these great activities, and I hope that you're all thinking about how you might continue to serve or join in with some of those. Now we're going to hear about KAIROS's Jubilee 2025 campaign and the People's Forum that took place in June in Southern Alberta. So I will be presenting to you two speakers to help us learn about that. Shannon Neufeldt, who you've already heard from briefly this morning, and Willard Metzger. Shannon is the KAIROS Member Relations and Network Coordinator, as she mentioned, and she told you a little bit about that. Shannon's calling is to serve and equip the church to incarnate God's justice and peace, and to pass these gifts on to the next generation. She creates spaces, opportunities, and resources to help people to be the change they want to see in the world. This is you. Shannon is a settler of Germanic descent who has finally started to call to Toronto home after 30 years away from the prairies. Shannon has more than 3 decades of experience in preaching, teaching, organizing, and writing for young and old and every between. Earning a Master of Divinity in the middle of those decades confirmed and enhanced her capacities. Willard Metzger has been Executive Director of Citizens for Public Justice since 2019. He has decades of senior leadership experience in Mennonite Church Canada, Canadian Council of Churches, and World Vision Canada. He also served as congregational clergy for 18 years. As an author and public speaker, Willard has addressed crowds across Canada and globally. His passion for justice and the faith community's responsibility in seeking justice is evident. CPJ is a national progressive charitable organization of members who are inspired by faith to act for social and environmental justice in Canadian public policy. While CPJ has its roots in the Christian tradition, we partner regularly with other faith groups and non-faith-based groups, building solidarity across broader advocacy movements. CPJ's work focuses on 3 key policy areas: poverty eradication in Canada, climate justice, and refugee and migrant rights. Shannon and Willard.
Well, thank you. It is a delight to be here with everybody. And I did get permission right away to from the KAIROS Prairie North. I put some little postcards on your tables. And this is an initiative we're starting at CPJ. And that is, we're going to take these postcards to the Prime Minister's constituency office once that has been identified. And it basically says, Prime Minister, Canada has always been known as a welcoming place for refugees, and we want it to stay that way. So there's an opportunity for your name and address on the lines and the bubble, any personal comment you'd like to make to the Prime Minister. If you leave them on the table, I will collect them afterwards and put them with all the others we're collecting to deliver to the Prime Minister. So thank you very much. I was asked first just to say a few words on why did CPJ decide to join part of the Jubilee Coalition, the Turn Debt into Hope Coalition. And you heard in the introduction, Citizens for Public Justice. It's an over 60-year-old organization that has always been advocating and lobbying the federal government around federal policies, and that is around the areas of refugee migrant rights, eradicating poverty in Canada, and climate justice. But the reason that CPJ became part of the Jubilee initiative, Turn Debt into Hope, was more because of our understanding of what is public justice, as opposed to just ordinary social justice. So public justice is not the same as seeking personal justice, or it's not the same as seeking sector justice, where a lot of the lobbying organizations, they're lobbying for maybe a specific avenue of their business concerns, or for instance, you might say that there could be a Christian group lobbying for Christian rights. But public justice it would be more that a justice where a just society where all people and creation are able to flourish as the Creator intended. So early on, our founder, Gerald Vandersteen, said justice, it's about justice, not just us. So it's not personal, it's not even lobbying, seeking justice for the Christian community. It's seeking justice for everyone and all creation, building a society that everything can flourish as Creator intended. So that's the one part of the public justice. The other part of the public justice lens is that we all have a responsibility then in creating a common shared society where all people and creation can flourish. Individuals, we all have a responsibility to be good neighbors who seek to live equitably together. That's a personal responsibility of public justice. Organizations, volunteer groups like CPJ, charities like CPJ, we have a role and responsibility in creating this public justice environment. Businesses have a role and responsibility, and governments have a role and responsibility as well. So part of CPJ's advocacy work is to lobby the federal government to be responsible to do what only the government can do. For instance, individuals, businesses, volunteer organizations, we are not able to develop policies that will be binding for all society in creating a just environment. Only businesses or only the government can do that. And so we lobby the federal government to make sure you do your responsibility. We're not saying that creating a public just environment is all up to you, not at all. We have a responsibility as an organization. Individuals have a responsibility. So we want to do that public education to remind people of that. But the things that only you can do, government, we're calling on make sure you do that because no one else can do that. So in this case, in the cause of the Jubilee, only the government can erase debt for countries that are paying more on interest payments than on meeting the needs of their own people. We can't do that as individuals. KAIROS can't do that. CPJ can't do that. Even provincial governments can't do that. But the national governments of the various countries, they need to do that. And so that's why we want to lobby to be a part of that. CPJ also understands that part of the responsibility of individuals and organizations is then to hold governments accountable for their work. So to be passive and not to do lobbying or advocating is to allow often lobby that is driven by greed to infect federal policies with aspects of injustice and prejudice. So part of the personal responsibility is to say, no, government, we're going to hold you accountable. And so that's why we're here. And that's part of our personal responsibility. So standing in solidarity with nations that are severely restricted by the weight of interest debt is a responsibility of individuals and organizations committed to seeking public justice, creating a global community where all people and creation are able to flourish as Creator God intended.
Willard and I are working in tandem today as representatives of the core Canadian Jubilee team. There are 5 organizations that came together as the Jubilee year began to say we want to support Jubilee initiatives in Canada. And so Citizens for Public Justice and KAIROS are 2 of those. The other 3, Development and Peace, Caritas Canada, the Canadian Council of Churches, and ORCE, the Office of Religious Congregations for Integral Ecology. So those 5 organizations have been meeting together all year long to support the Turn Debt into Hope campaign. Here we are in November, 10 months into the year of Jubilee. I hope you have heard about the Turn Debt into Hope campaign already. And as such, I'm going to make a few assumptions or move really quickly. I am going to assume you know that 3.3 people, 3.3, goodness, I forgot a word, 3.3 billion people live in countries that spend more on interest than education or health, as Josh told us this morning. I'm going to assume you know that these debts cannot possibly be paid because the lenders won't die, but the people in the indebted countries certainly will. With that laugh of health care at all. This is a quote from 1987 to Thomas Sankara. If we repay, we are going to die. And I'm going to assume that you know that these debt, next one, that the idea that the global south owes is doing all of the owing proves to be false when the ecological debts of developed countries like Canada are taken into account. And Willard, I believe you have some more to share about ecological debts.
Yeah, just to unpack the concept of ecological debt. I think there is a global realization that's deepening that all governments must be responsible to address climate change. The negative impact of the rising global temperatures affects everyone. So all of the global community must work together to combat this global crisis. And that means an immediate transition away from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy. But under-resourced nations are unable to make that transition without global financial support from wealthier countries. I was a part of COP29, and there the delegations, the global delegations, many from island states or certainly underdeveloped countries, they're saying that $1.3 trillion is needed, and that's what they were looking for. Promises from wealthy countries to support at the tune of $1.3 trillion. And I remember thinking, my goodness, that's such a huge amount. How will that ever happen? Until one of the island states reminded the delegation, $7 trillion is being spent annually on wealthy nations on fossil fuel subsidies. So we're asking for 1.3 trillion out of the 7 trillion. So it's, the money is there. It is simply put in the wrong place. It makes it grossly unjust. What makes it grossly unjust is that most of the wealth generated by developed nations was by their exploitation of natural resources of the very countries they now want to hold accountable for transitioning away from fossil fuels. In simple terms, wealthy nations exploited the resources of countries and are now demanding those same countries not use those same resources. Is that just? No. Furthermore, while nations increase in their exploitative wealth, they lent money back to those countries to aid in their societal development, healthcare, education, infrastructure. So in other words, if the resources of forests, let's say a country, and this is before, because this would have been, years ago, right? So before there was an understanding of the importance of forests in our whole climate justice. But let's say you are a leader of a country and the resources of forests that you have, but you do not have the finances to transform that into lumber to build houses. So you sell the rights to your forests to a country that has the money to come in, fell the trees, cut them all into lumber. Then with the money they make from your trees, they give you a loan to be able to build some hospitals and schools using most times, using their country contract companies. So now your resources are depleted and you have an impossible debt to service. Is that just? No. So when we talk about debt, should we not insist that wealthy nations have a moral debt, a justice debt to the very nations that they exploited? That's, I think, the concept of ecological debt.
Thank you, Willard. And we have heard various times through the years, different people explaining different pieces of that. If you are looking for these resources, check out the websites, KAIROS website, Development and Peace website, and find the webinars, find the writings that can give you the details if you haven't heard them already. Finally, I'm going to assume that you recognize these 3 calls. These are the same calls that the entire global Jubilee community is using. 3 universal asks: to cancel debts, to reform the system. That's the part that didn't happen in 2000, even though they were already asking. And to lodge debt resolution within the United Nations, rather than the IMF, where the lender is calling the shots, but a place where everyone could have a seat at the table. If any of these assumptions are not true, do check out the resources. I've been asked by the planning team here to share a little bit more about the G7 Jubilee People's Forum. And I also want to share with you some of the political pieces and information about how things are progressing that you may not have heard on educational webinars. So here's what I am going to tell you. The Jubilee People's Forum, what inspired it, and where we're at now. I do want to maybe step back for a second and think about the title of today's event. Fires Jubilee Whole, making the connections. And I just want to ask here, we were planning this event in the heat of summer, and what was on everyone's mind was the fires. Is there anyone in this room who had their person or their property impacted by the fires in Saskatchewan? And do you know folks, and do you know communities that were impacted by the fires in Saskatchewan, right here? Why are those fires happening? Why are they potentially out of control? Right? Some of the same reasons of what Willard was just talking about. Forests stripped and money resources available but not spent in the right places. It's all part of the same climate change picture. So I want you to just sit for a minute with the images you saw on the news this summer, with the feelings that brings up when you know communities are at risk, forests are at risk, our way of life is at risk. And I invite you to think in your own mind where the connections are, right? Between the fossil fuels we all use, how we spend our monies, how our governments spend that money. And this is what the whole Jubilee campaign comes out of. Making the connections, knowing that the Jubilee is not just an economic campaign. And climate campaigns are not just about the environment. It's always the two together. And so as we came into this Jubilee year, we noted that there were 4 or more major global occasions that would be happening this year that advocate for economics in a world sphere. And one of those is the G7. The G7 was meeting in Canada this year. And so we were invited by the Global Jubilee Committee to do advocacy, to bring people together. And the People's Forum is what came about. So I'm going to do the People's Forum, tell you a little bit about it by the numbers as a quick way to talk about what was a major gathering in Calgary just prior to the G7 summit in Kananaskis nearby. 103 participants presenting 36,400 petition signatures. We had 4 people from the United States, that'll come up later, and 3 Global South partners from the Cardinal from Peru and our partners from Kenya and Palestine were with us to really drive home the global perspectives. The weekend began with an interfaith service. This was, for me, a very touching moment in the whole weekend. 9 different faiths were represented by the Calgary Interfaith Council. You hear them, see them talking together. You see the blowing of the shofar from our Jewish participants, and the meal that was shared with us that day. One day of action, that was the conclusion of the weekend. Many groups from across Calgary and again across Canada were on the streets of Calgary on that Sunday to send messages to the global leaders. One day of prayer on the land, and this was also a touching moment as we were on the Stoney Nakoda land there at the medicine wheel and surrounded by the mountains and the open sky, and praying for the G7 leaders and for justice in our land. 6 plenary sessions with all sorts of different speakers, including some impromptu call and response chanting practice with our number of the young adults that were present. 13 workshops on a variety of topics, including ecological debt and each aspect of the Jubilee campaign. And 10 Calgary churches visited on the Sunday morning. We spread out and spread the news of Jubilee and invited petition signatures all across the city. 21 media hits after the fact. And I want to tell you a little bit more of the story of some folks from Whitehorse. There has been a KAIROS group in Whitehorse over the years. A little smaller, a little less active now than it maybe once was. But there are still some really dedicated folks there. Some of those dedicated folks are in Whitehorse United Church. And they grew the movement this year. They invited some folks in their congregation who had not previously been involved, but are now very involved. Stephanie Nobecourt and Maria Alexei Dangru are these 2 women here, and they were invited to come to Calgary. So Whitehorse United Church sponsored them to come to Calgary for the People's Forum. They participated through the whole weekend, and they did interviews with their local media. And this was posted in the local journalism for Whitehorse. So they took that extra effort of reaching out to the media. This fall, when we invited everyone to do Proclaim Jubilee, this is where some of our American friends come in. Some of those folks were really inspired by the blowing of the shofar, the long Jewish horn, which was just a really powerful, visceral moment in the worship service. And so they took that back to their groups and their organizations, and they said, what can we do for Jubilee? Let's tell everyone about it, invite churches to use a horn. It could be a different kind of horn to proclaim Jubilee. And so they wrote up some resources, they put out the word and invited everyone to proclaim Jubilee. Well, Stephanie and Marie Alexi saw this again and said, you know, we did the petition back in spring, but it's not everybody. We don't have all the signatures we'd like to get, and we want this Jubilee campaign to be successful, and so they decided to do it again. So I've actually seen a video of, you know, they had their United Church there, and the horn was at the back, and people didn't notice it. All of a sudden, it was the horn announcing Jubilee, a year of Jubilee. So they made more announcements. They invited more signatures in their church. They are now planning a movie night about Jubilee, and they've gotten themselves a table at the Christmas fair where they will have the petitions and invite more signatures for Jubilee. So I thank the KAIROS representatives in Whitehorse and Stephanie and Marie Alexi for a really solid example of what advocacy can look like in a local context. And so I'm going to leave these folks here on the screen for a minute, their inspiration, and just tell you a little bit about the advocacy pieces that are a little bit behind the scenes. So you all know that we were leading towards G7. Did you also know that there's a C7 and an L7 and a W7? Okay, some guesses here. What do you think the W7 is? In social justice spaces, who starts with W?
World.
Willard, world, women. W7 is a women's organization. There is a youth organization. There is a business organization. The two that KAIROS and our partners were involved with was the C7 is civil 7 and the L7 is labor 7. So first of all, the C7, so NGOs and all sorts of organizations work in the C7. And so that's the same 7 countries as the G7 summit. And they get together in advance of the summit. And they have working groups, and they were talking about economics. They were talking about ecological, and they wrote a bunch of reports and came to some agreements across dozens of organizations across 7 countries, came to an agreement and came up with the C7 communique, which you can find online. KAIROS was able to, and the Canadian Coalition was able to put people into each of those working groups. And the Jubilee and Turn Debt into Hope campaign, the cancellation of debts, was written into that communique. And then the C7 has an official opportunity to present that to the G7. So that was one of our advocacy routes. One of the bonus that we didn't know it was going to happen, we didn't have any people sitting on the L7 committee, but you open up that report and debt comes out there too. Well, because maybe labor knows something about global debt. And so they also were mentioning Jubilee and the Turn Debt into Hope campaign and the cancellation of debts. So that was wonderful to see. Now, try as we might with the 103 people that you saw before to get a meeting with the Prime Minister before the G7. It did not happen. Our letters didn't go unanswered, but there was no time to be able to meet. And so we sent our messages through social media, as we often end up doing. We actually sent a representative to sit outside the G7. He was invited to be with Cooperation Canada and sit there in the media space. And maybe we'll get a moment. Maybe we'll be able to talk to somebody. Maybe we can catch them in the hallways. To no avail at that point either. But what did happen is in the back spaces, in the back rooms, talk among the media and the NGOs, and they're like, you guys actually really made a splash there with that People's Forum. Wish we'd thought of that. So Dean brought back some encouraging remarks. Another thing that did come out of it now is that one of the delegates that KAIROS has chosen to go to COP30 was nominated to the Canadian delegation at COP30. So one among about 200, but someone who gets to go right into the negotiation rooms and be there, and has been able to have some opportunities to have a few side conversations, right? To really know what's going on and to talk to the politicians in the hallways. She can't have a voice at the mic, but she can make her presence known. And so Beth Lorimer is representing us at COP30 with the Canadian government right now, this week. It's good. It's baby steps. We're working along the way. So as we mentioned at the beginning, this is a global campaign. Globally, there have been 200,000 signatures collected so far. How do you do the math? You know what I said that we had, in June, we had 36,000. Does anybody know how many Canadians have collected so far? Anybody looked at that number lately?
Around 75,000, some 70-some thousand.
Oh, we're not quite there yet. Not quite. No, we're getting close to 45,000.
And what did I see?
I think in development and peace, you're maybe at about 70% of your goal.
Okay, maybe that's what I'm saying.
And development and peace has been a leader in the Canadian scene, and we're all looking to you for the examples and learning. Maybe it's a little slower, but we're getting there. I tell you that globally we've collected 200,000 to say Canada's putting a good contribution in there with 45,000 so far and growing. So I want to tell you that we have the opportunity to meet with a global Jubilee committee. It's an interesting space to be in with folks from across Europe and a few places in the South. And that group was very active in Spain with the Financing for Development Conference. Some in that group worked with South Africa on their statement about economic need in Africa. There are some there that have created this very fun commercial, and I'm going to tell you to watch for it. They were going to release it on the 12th and they had to delay it for some reason. And so do watch our social media for a 90-second spoof television advert starring British actor and CAFOD, Caritas England ambassador, Alex McQueen, best known for The Thick of It, Rivals, and The In-Betweeners. Those might not be our shows. So this actor exposes the global debt crisis as the equivalent of a payday loan trap. And so in the film, McQueen plays a fictional, predatory, dodgy lender as a stand-in for private banks and hedge funds that target low-income countries. And it will be a fun one to see and to share, and a way to kind of meet people where they're at and get people's attention about this. I want to conclude my advocacy pieces with telling you about a major win that I heard this month. There is a country where the government has endorsed the campaign First Minister John Swinney of Scotland made a statement to the Scottish Parliament on October 28th. Today, I announce to Parliament our support for the Cancel Debt, Choose Hope campaign. That's how they worded it in Scotland. I raise my own voice, my government's voice, and Scotland's voice in support of finding a fair, long-term solution to the global debt crisis. So what now? We are almost at the end of 2025. Please continue collecting signatures. I have brought some posters, I've brought extra petitions, there are some booklets that are some explainers, and there are some Advent resources, which you might want to pick up just for your own reflection, or to pass on, or to use in your preaching. See how a few writers have connected the scriptures of Advent with the themes of Jubilee. So those pages are available on the table over here. You can, those of you online, you can find all of this on the Animators Toolkit on the KAIROS website. We'll be sending an email around with some of those links next week. In 2026, we will be seeking meetings with high-level politicians, as well as inviting folks to seek meetings with your own MPs to talk about Jubilee. So we'll take these petition numbers and be bringing them to many places in the Canadian government in the first half of 2026. April 28th and 29th, we plan to be in Ottawa gathering for lobby days and a public rally that will be a way to present this campaign. And we said in September, and we'll say it again, 100,000 signatures is mission possible. Folks, I'm going to show you that video now. For those who want to listen, if you don't want to listen now, I'll send you the link to it in the email, and you'll get the opportunity then. But here's a little bit about a new global partnerships program.
This project comes from the reality that is being lived by so many communities throughout the world, and that is the intersecting and compounding impacts of escalating conflict, climate crisis, and growing inequalities, including gender inequality. Our partners, Women Peacebuilders and Land Defenders, are already addressing these issues because they are working with communities that are living these impacts. And we are being called on to accompany them in support and advocacy. We know that Women Peacebuilders build more sustainable, more equitable, just, and peaceful communities and societies. We have plenty of evidence of this.
South Sudan currently is going through all the three elements: the conflict, the climate change, and the gender issues. So this has come at the right time. Also looking at the part whereby women are the beneficiaries and the implementers of this project is also a very positive part of the project. And it is not just the Women Link who will benefit from the project, but even people from our member churches, our ICCs, and even the population of South Sudan.
Et ce programme, c'est un programme qui vient à peu nommer parce que c'est un programme qui va permettre à la femme qui veut accéder au poste de prise de décision de savoir développer les mécanismes et les stratégies pour atténuer les conséquences des changements climatiques et s'adapter. La lutte contre les violences basées sur le genre puisse permettre à la femme d'être autonome et de participer au développement du pays par des actions de paix initiées par les femmes.
Para nosotras es muy importante tener esta oportunidad de seguir construyendo alianzas con KAIROS, con todo el equipo y con la embajada canadiense aquí en nuestro territorio, porque este acompañamiento blinda nuestro proceso y hoy, donde los derechos ambientales se entretejen con la importancia de los derechos humanos y la labor que hacemos las defensoras que construimos paz en los territorios, es muy importante hablar del triple nexo: justicia de género, cambio climático y conflicto armado, para que la paz sea un ejercicio transformador e integral, como siempre lo hemos soñado las mujeres de la Organización Femenina Popular aquí en este territorio.
But what we need and what this project is our chance to go beyond resilience, to build something. We begin on the community level, making sure that we're creating inclusive spaces, equitable spaces, saying what we've known for years, and that is a woman can, just like a man can, and she does and she leads.
وعندنا كمان الصراعات التي تواجه المجتمع كمصادرة الأراضي وقلة المياه وارتفاع درجات الحرارة بسبب تغير المناخ. هاي المشاكل كلها بتواجهها المجتمع ككل والنساء والفتيات بشكل خاص. احنا في مركز وئام بنسعى إلى تمكين المرأة بحقوقها وقدرتها وحقوقها على العمل، حيث أن المرأة هي نصف.
I believe that this project offers a unique opportunity to build meaningful relationships between our global partners and Indigenous communities here on Turtle Island. So through knowledge exchange and solidarity, we can uplift Indigenous voices, share land-based teachings, and learn from one another's resilience in the face of conflict, climate change, and ongoing colonial impacts. I believe that these exchanges will strengthen our collective work, creating a space for healing, justice, and renewed relationships with the land and with each other.
This work matters deeply here in Canada. We know that the climate crisis is driving conflict across land and water, and that Indigenous women and youth are at the forefront of defending territories and advancing just climate solutions. By learning with our partners in the Global South and with women Peacebuilders, we can strengthen the Canadian climate movement's understanding of the nexus of climate conflict and gender, amplify women's leadership, and deepen solidarity across borders.
By fostering policy and decision-making, KAIROS contributes to empowering women peacebuilders and their local networks to take action and to take leadership roles on addressing the triple nexus and influencing policies, decision-making, and structures. Finally, through an innovative and integrated approach, KAIROS enhances local capacity and strengthens the impact of gender transformative approaches needed to tackle the triple nexus.
This is a fabulous opportunity for you in the networks to learn and engage and be involved in global justice. During the 5 years, partners will come and visit different parts of Canada, and a few people from Turtle Island will have the opportunity to go and visit partners in their context.
In DRC, South Sudan, Palestine, and Colombia, our partners operate at the intersection of climate, conflict, and gender. Their innovative solutions and responses are essential for addressing the economic and socio-political empowerment of women and girls. With this project, we strive to achieve sustainable and equitable societies with long-lasting peace and fairness for all.
We're going to welcome back Willard, that we heard from before. And also we have two more speakers for you today. Peter Preble on my left there, the far left, has been involved in the work of the Saskatchewan Environmental Society for over 30 years. He served as a member of the Legislature of Saskatchewan for 16 years. Peter has been the president of SES Solar Cooperative, the first renewable power cooperative in Saskatchewan. He holds a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Prince Edward Island and master's degrees in education and sustainable environmental management from the University of Saskatchewan. Glenn Wright has degrees in engineering and law from the University of Saskatchewan. He worked for nearly 20 years in resource extraction as a mechanical engineer, and he farms near Saskatoon. Glenn became a lawyer to advocate for climate action. Glenn is leading 2 legal challenges in Saskatchewan centered on coal and gas-fired electricity generation concerning the Crown utility, SaskPower. Did I miss someone? No, that's it. Okay, so take it away.
All right, well, I've been asked to start And it's an honor to be here with these giants, doing incredible work. And so it's just a delight to have CPJ, Citizens for Public Justice, part of this initiative. But these are really the people that have been carrying it. Plus, you'll hear more of other individuals that are engaged in this litigation as well. But I've been asked to speak again on why did CPJ become part of this initiative? And it really goes back to my earlier comments. This is how we see our responsibility to hold governments accountable, to do the things that only the governments can do. Citizens and organizations like Citizens for Public Justice, we can't make federal decisions that are binding across political spheres. We can try and influence individuals. We're responsible for how we all act as individual people, but we need to hold governments accountable to do the things that only the government can do. But in this case, we're also responsible, conversely, to hold governments accountable when they are doing things they should not be doing. So we need to hold governments accountable not to make decisions that risk the welfare of their communities. We need to hold governments accountable not to push through decisions that negatively impact the most vulnerable. We need to hold governments accountable to not ignore their responsibilities for creating a global response to climate justice. And you will hear that's what this case touches on. The Saskatchewan government is not continuing to do their responsibility in not only their commitment to their constituency to keep them safe and to make a healthy environment. They're acting against that. They're acting against a commitment that they've made to the Canadian government. They're acting against the commitment that the Canadian government with the provinces has made to the global community. So the Saskatchewan government has a responsibility to care for their communities. And if they disregard that responsibility, then it becomes the responsibility of organizations like CPJ and individuals, which you will hear of, to rally in solidarity in support of their neighbors, their fellow citizens, and the global community. And so that's why CPJ is a part of this important initiative. And you will hear more about the exact aspects of it all. And then I'll have a little comment at the end.
So I'm going to talk about the case more broadly, but we're focused in on a case that we've launched against the government of Saskatchewan, essentially saying that the province has made a major mistake by announcing that it's going to keep all of Saskatchewan's conventional coal-fired power stations running well beyond the federal deadline for closure of those plants. The government of Canada has said by January of 2030, all conventional coal-fired power stations in Canada should close. And every provincial government is complying with that law, with the exception of the Saskatchewan government. We go to the next slide. I'm not sure if you can see the print from here, so don't worry too much about what's on these printed slides. But for those of you who are close up, you'll be able to read them. I thought the screen might be a little bigger than it is. So at any rate, every province, as I said, is complying with federal law except Saskatchewan. So Alberta has closed all its conventional coal-fired power plants as of 2024. Ontario did it more than a decade ago. Nova Scotia is committed to doing it by 2030. All the other provinces have already gone off coal completely. So Saskatchewan is insisting on keeping its plants running. And you know, just to put the well, first of all, as all of you know, I'm sure, you know, coal is the dirtiest of all the ways of generating electricity. You've got a lot of smog, you've got a lot of particulate matter, you've got acid rain, you've got all the public health problems that are associated with burning coal. You've got mercury being put into the environment, which ends up, for instance, in our fish. All of that is associated with burning coal for generating electricity. And then coal on a planetary basis is the biggest single contributor to climate change. So there are a lot of reasons for phasing out coal, and the federal government has made a good decision by insisting that each province do it. And now, you know, where we're at right now is that Saskatchewan has about, as you know, 3% of Canada's population, accounts for about 4% of Canada's electricity generation, but accounts for 24% of all the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with electricity generation in Canada. So you can see that we're having a disproportional impact, and the provincial government is insisting that that's going to continue. Why don't we move to the next slide? Thanks. So as Willard has mentioned, and Willard, I hope you'll just jump in at any point, but Canada is, first of all, it's becoming pretty clear that Canada's unlikely to meet the targets that it promised the international community it would achieve with respect to greenhouse gas emission reduction. Unfortunately, the federal government appears to be poised to abandon that. But the commitment that's being made to the United Nations is that Canada would achieve a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to the 2005 level of emissions by the year 2030. So 2005 is the baseline. We went well above that baseline. Now we're heading back below it. So we're about 8% below right now nationally. But one of the big reasons why we're not making more progress is the policies of the government of Alberta and the government of Saskatchewan. And here is a very blatant case with Saskatchewan refusing to phase out its coal-fired power plants. So one of the reasons why we're not going to make that target, because I mean, and you know, Saskatchewan's government is pursuing this in the context of already having province-wide greenhouse gas emissions for our population size that are 3.5 times the national average. And so this is a reckless policy to be pursuing when you've already got such a big greenhouse gas footprint. The other point that this slide makes is the simple fact that we're setting a terrible example in Saskatchewan for the rest of the world. The United Nations, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the International Energy Agency have all been saying to the global community, industrialized countries need to phase out all their coal-fired power stations by 2030, and the developing world needs to phase out all its coal-fired power stations by 2040. And here's Saskatchewan saying, well, we're going to run our coal-fired power stations to 2050. That's just a flagrant violation of the moral principles that the International Energy Agency and the IPCC and the United Nations are advocating. Go to the next slide. So, you know, there's lots of alternatives that the Saskatchewan government could have pursued that wouldn't have involved keeping our coal-fired power plants burning, and that can be implemented quite quickly. Because one of the things that you can bring online fairly quickly is major investments in electricity conservation, major investments in electricity efficiency. 70% of our electricity in this province is being consumed by 150 companies. So working with those big industrial consumers of electricity to make their facilities more energy efficient is an obvious and sensible thing to be doing. And the government could do a lot more in that regard. Those companies should also be paying more for their electricity, in my opinion. They only pay half the rate that you pay as a residential customer. So there's not the same, you know, financial incentive to conserve. So that's one option that we've never pursued seriously in this province, is a really big investment in electricity conservation and electricity efficiency. Another thing is that, of course, if you roll out, you know, you tend to get more wind at night. You tend to get, of course, solar during the day. You roll them out together, you could start to displace some of your use of coal through a combination of wind, solar, and battery storage. And the province, in fairness, the government has rolled out some wind. We're at about 9% wind right now in terms of our electricity generation, but solar is barely on the map at all in this province. And so that's a second big option, and investing in energy storage, like for instance Ontario has done, is a good way to go in terms of short-term balancing of wind and solar. Another thing that we could be doing is we could be improving our connection with the government of Manitoba. In other words, working with Manitoba Hydro. We've got a 5,500 megawatt grid in this province, but we've only got a 290 megawatt connection with Manitoba. So in other words, that's the most electricity we can import or sell to them if they need it. Expanding that to say 1,000 megawatts would make a lot more sense. And again, would help us to displace coal. And another thing that I'd like to see is for the government to invest in electricity generation through what's called cogeneration of electricity. So in other words, the Corey Potash mine is an example of that near my home in Saskatoon. There, what you're seeing is that the government, the facility, the Corey Potash mine, is burning natural gas for industrial heating purposes. And then that gas is used simultaneously to generate electricity as well. So it's a much more efficient way of generating electricity than a natural gas fired power station. You're with less greenhouse gas emissions associated with it. A combination of all those things could have gone a very long way to displacing coal if the government had gotten serious about it. And unfortunately, we haven't in this province. We can go to the next slide. So what's now being proposed is that we're going to spend roughly $900 million on retrofitting these coal-fired power plants. I think that's a real underestimate. There's 6 conventional units to retrofit. Bear in mind that when one single unit at Boundary Dam was retrofitted for clean coal more than a decade ago now, the cost was $1.5 billion. These are units now, many of them are 50 years old. There's going to be a lot of replacement parts and a lot of work that I think $900 million is a real underestimate of what it's going to cost to repair and retrofit these plants. And quite apart from that, you know, if we win our court case, or if the federal government enforces its law, which it should be doing, this will be a stranded asset. So there's a lot of questions, hard questions that need to be asked about why invest $900 million in a technology that's outdated, that should be phased out, and that potentially could become a stranded asset. I mean, the other thing is that SaskPower has already acknowledged that there's going to be long lead times in getting this work done. So the supply chains are going to be quite tied up for this work. It's going to end up being more costly, I'm quite certain, than the province is projecting right now. We can go to the next slide.
And maybe we should talk about the Saskatchewan made that, the government of Saskatchewan made that decision without proper consultation with the Saskatchewan people. So they should actually be quite alarmed by this. I think Peter will definitely note that the SaskPower did do consultation, but they really were under the assumption during those consultations that we were phasing out of coal because that's what we had agreed to with the Canadian government. And yet then the Saskatchewan government told SaskPower to move in the opposite direction without any public consultation. And that's a decision, as Peter has pointed out, 900 billion. And even at the court case that we were there, that Glenn will speak to, there were some coal miners there, and I had a conversation with one of them, and they know this is phasing out. We know that. They're obviously concerned that what if we just stop doing this, what's going to happen to our family? So just transition is a key piece. But even the coal industry knows we are phasing out. And so why would the Saskatchewan government just unilaterally decide, nope, we're going to ramp that back up. We're going to invest in it to keep it going instead, and without any public consultation. I think that should be a big concern.
Yeah.
The final thing I want to do before turning it over to Glenn is just give you a little bit of a sense of what's happening globally in terms of where dollars are being invested. And for those of you at the back, this will be hard to read, but back in a decade ago in 2015, we were investing a lot more in fossil fuels than we were in clean energy. And today that process is being reversed. Now we're investing a lot more in clean energy than we are in fossil fuels on a global basis. And then where are the big investments in fossil fuels? Well, you can see that there's spread between coal, and this is nuclear power, by the way, and gas. But this is what I really want to point out, is that there's a lot of money. This purple bar is how much is being invested in energy efficiency. And this yellow bar is how much is being invested in renewable energy. And this bar here is how much is being invested in the grid and in energy storage. And notice that these are all getting a lot of attention. That little blue bar in here is what's being invested in nuclear power. So nuclear power, like the government of Saskatchewan is saying, well, we're going to keep the coal plants running, and then we're going to replace them with nuclear reactors.
15 years from now.
Yeah, and that's going to be a very slow process. And it's not what the majority of the world are doing. The majority of the world are investing in renewables, in energy efficiency, and in battery storage and grid improvements. We can go to the next slide. And the final one. I just want to point out that what's happening in terms of a solar revolution. Solar power, that's this bar here, is now outstripping all other investments in electricity generation in terms of new investment. So this is the latest number for solar, and this represents the investment in wind, natural gas for electricity generation, coal for electricity generation, hydro, everything else. Solar's outstripping it all. What are we doing in Saskatchewan? We're hardly investing anything in solar power. So we're not paying attention to what's happening in the rest of the world as we're formulating our energy policy. I want to turn it over to Glenn, and Glenn's going to talk about the legal case. And I want to just say that the Environmental Society and Citizens for Public Justice are so grateful to Glenn Wright for taking on this case, and he's doing it pro bono, no charge whatsoever.
Well, I want to thank Peter for those kind words, and both SES and CPJ. We as lawyers can't act if we don't have clients. And so that's the important part that CPJ and SES are playing. Is they're the ones who are standing up for our rights and to challenge the government in this action here. So my slide here, I intend to talk for no more than 10 minutes, and I'll try and make this very understandable for you. But the case I'm going to talk about specifically is the coal case. So we just launched this case on July 18th of this year, exactly 1 month after the government announced, in kind of an oblique way, actually. Normally, when you get a decision of this nature, it's usually announced either there's an order in council or a decision in cabinet, but what we got actually in this case was a letter written by the minister for the Crown Corporation SaskPower to SaskPower employees. So it's kind of a strange way for such a decision to be made. And in that letter, it specifically characterizes this as the government's decision to direct SaskPower to extend coal. And so unlike our first case where we were making a constitutional challenge, we were trying to say that the government's actions in our gas case are going to cause climate change, which violates our charter rights to life and security of person and equality rights for young people. In this case, in the coal case, we took a totally different approach where we used an administrative law process called judicial review. So I know this is getting very technical, but in almost every aspect of our life where we deal with the government, there is some administrative decision maker that can make a decision, whether it's a labor relations board or a crop insurance claim adjuster. And whenever those administrative decisions are made, usually there's an appeal process. And once you get through that appeal process, if you've exhausted all of your chances to appeal, the last course of action you have is to go to the Court of King's Bench and ask for a judicial review of that decision to make sure that the decision is reasonable and lawful. So in this case, we had the government of Saskatchewan directing SaskPower. They made the fundamental change, a fundamental change in direction, deciding to extend coal. So we couldn't find any administrative appeal process. So it led us directly to this judicial review. So we quickly put forward our argument and filed this action. And we're trying to say that the decision made to extend coal is both unreasonable because they're not considering various constraints that they should, like charter values, like the International Court of Justice, like the Paris Agreement, like many of the things Peter talked about in terms of the moral obligations we have. And they didn't have a very good economic analysis as well. So those are all the things that we think are unreasonable. But there's an even higher standard when you're doing judicial review. It's called the correctness standard. And that's when you're doing something that is unlawful, you're going to do something that breaks the law. That's held to that correctness standard. And so we're saying in this case, we think the coal decision is actually illegal because it will violate the federal coal regulations. It will violate the clean electricity regulations. And we also think it violates Saskatchewan's own management and reduction of greenhouse gases regulations. So these are all the reasons why we're moving forward with this decision or this request for a judicial review. Unfortunately, the first thing the government did when we had our first appearance on August the 12th is they really came to the first hearing, I would say, in a manner that was unprofessional. They weren't well prepared. They just said to the judge, we think this is not a justiciable issue. And so we're going to be filing an application to strike the case. They didn't even have the application prepared that day, but they managed to persuade the judge that that's probably how this should proceed. So they then filed an application to strike, and we had just our hearing to make arguments about whether or not we should even have this case be heard by the courts. That just happened on the Monday past, on November 10th.
Do you want to maybe describe justiciability or whatever that term was?
Yeah, justiciability is about whether or not the subject matter of the case or the claim is something that the court has the ability to hear, and it's something that's proper or legitimate for the court to hear. So, I mean, we think this is a justiciable type of decision that the court should supervise. The kind of things that aren't justiciable would be if we were to try and ask the court to determine who's the greatest hockey player of all time, right?
We already know that.
Or if the court was to try to ask the court, which is the one true God, right? I mean, that's something that the court could not opine upon. The other thing I should mention here is we also think that the coal decision is also violating the equivalency agreement. So in Canada, we have these federal coal regulations, and they, as Peter mentioned, they meant that, or they were trying to move us in the direction that all conventional coal, that's coal without some sort of pollution control on it or carbon capture, all of those plants were meant to be shut down by December 31st of 2029. Saskatchewan tried to get an extension on that for some of our plants through what's called an equivalency agreement. So those federal coal regulations are made pursuant to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. And so that's why Saskatchewan proclaimed this Management and Reductions of Greenhouse Gases Act to try and get this equivalency agreement so that we could extend our use of coal a little bit beyond the end of 2029. But we think this coal decision now is actually not in good faith. It doesn't align with what we were supposed to be doing with the equivalency agreement. Just another reason why we think this is an illegal decision. We could go to the next slide, please. One of the reasons I think this case is really important, though, is because what we're trying to do here is help uphold the rule of law in Canada. If you've got certain premiers in various provinces in Canada who are ignoring the charter, who are, talking about running roughshod over, pronoun issues and rights, gender rights or equality rights. Here we've got a situation where now our provincial government is going to ignore or defy the federal law. So the more you see an erosion of people not enforcing the law or not following the law, it really sends a bad message that, well, maybe the law doesn't matter. And so this is why I'm honored to be part of this case, because this is about upholding the rule of law here in Canada so that we can maintain law and order and move collectively to do the things that we can't do individually. So the reason the rule of law is important, and I want to just point out, there's a new campaign all of the law societies throughout Canada, every provincial law society has contributed to this coalition. The new campaign is called Ours to Protect. It was just launched on November the 4th, just last week. And what we're seeing in Canada is an erosion of the rule of law. People are losing their trust in our institutions, whether it's vaccine mandates or whether it's culls of ostriches in British Columbia. All over Canada, we're seeing people question whether or not the authorities or the government are doing what's in the best interests of all of us as Canadians. And so this is why I think this case is also important here for us to try and promote the rule of law, saying that no one is above the law. Scott Moe and his minister cannot just make decisions in an arbitrary manner and tell our Crown Corporation SaskPower to spend nearly $1 billion refurbishing coal. Maybe the next slide, please. The rule of law is so much under threat that our Chief Justice, this is our Supreme Court of Canada's Chief Justice, Richard Wagner, he has expressed concerns about politicians, other leaders not reading the decisions that are coming out of all courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada, before they just openly defy or want to ignore what the courts are saying. And I think part of this, what the Supreme Court Justice was saying, is that this relates to disinformation. So I'm not sure how many of you are on social media, but quite often you will see misinformation or disinformation, things that aren't true, that are persuading people to mistrust our government or to mistrust things like the effectiveness of vaccines or whether the ostrich cull was necessary, those types of things. And I see it myself. We put announcements about our coal case and on West Central Online. It's a rural publication out of Kindersley, Saskatchewan. There are many, many comments, hundreds of comments on there about how we are, going to freeze in the dark and we can't live without coal power and that climate change is a hoax. So it's, unless we start talking to each other, to our friends and our neighbors about why this is important and helping them to identify misinformation and disinformation and helping them to think critically, I really worry that the rule of law may not withstand this attack that's coming towards us from all sides. Next slide, please. I've only got one slide after this, but I think this is another reason why this case is about upholding the rule of law, because 4 years ago, when we had the management and reduction of greenhouse gases pollution, sorry, not management, it was the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act, the pollution pricing court case that went all the way through 3 courts of appeal at the provincial level and went to the Supreme Court. This is a small clip from the Supreme Court's decision. And I think this is really important because 4 years ago, our top court said, climate change is real. It is caused by greenhouse gas emissions resulting from human activities, and it poses a grave threat to humanity's future. The only way to address the threat of climate change is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So these are our brightest and best minds in the country confirming this as fact. So this is no longer in dispute. And this is from 4 years ago. So that we would make a decision to extend coal in light of this factual information from our top court really tells me again that our government is undermining the rule of law in Canada. And my last slide, I think, is the next one. So often I hear a lot of distraction about, well, maybe it's if we all need to be vegetarians, or perhaps it's China is the problem. There's nothing we can do here. Everybody wants to try and distract and deflect. But the main thing about climate change, I think it's really just this simple. To stop dangerous climate change, it's necessary to replace fossil fuels. And replacing fossil fuels is mostly sufficient. It's the most important thing that we need to do to address climate change. So when we live in Saskatchewan with the best solar resource in Canada, one of the best wind resources in the world, it's shameful that we shouldn't be developing those resources to provide power for all of us in a clean manner. And I just want to turn over to Willard to close for us, and then we can take questions.
And maybe Glenn, if you could just tell the group as well. So it's CPJ et al., but who are the et al?
Oh, sorry. Yes, we actually had many people. My phone rang off the hook for many years about people wanting to file an action against this coal, against Saskatchewan continuing to use coal and the exemption they have in the equivalency fee. I kept pushing back and saying, we need to wait till there's a more a legitimate decision that can be challenged in court. So when this decision came out, I went through my list of people who I knew wanted to proceed, and we have only 3 individual persons, and then these 2 citizen non-governmental organizations. But the 3 individuals that we chose to represent, the broader public, Sherry Olson is a climate environmental activist in Saskatoon. She sits on several groups. I think she might actually be on this call here today. And then we have Kike Duick is a 12-year-old climate activist from Regina. So Kike is helping to represent. And then we also asked for somebody from Manitoba. And I was looking for someone beyond Saskatchewan's borders, because the pollution that we emit from our coal-fired plants affects everyone in Canada. And so we were fortunate enough to get a fellow by the name of Matthew Weens. I knew him from the National Farmers Union. He lives in Manitoba, so Manitoba, gets the most direct impacts from our pollution that comes from our coal-fired plants in southeastern Saskatchewan. So those are the 3 folks.
And that's important, because I'd like to close just on reflecting on, and Kiki was there at the November 10th hearing. So to see a 12-year-old pick up this cause with the kind of energy and passion, it's truly inspiring. Because how many, like most 12-year-olds on a day like today, or many a days, they're playing road hockey, maybe they're reading an entertaining book, they're hanging out with friends in the mall, like normal 12-year-old things. But here, this 12-year-old has been putting a lot of energy, passionate energy, into fighting the Saskatchewan government.
Right.
A 12-year-old shouldn't have to do that. A normal part of development as humans, for children, it's wanting to feel included, right? But Kike has put all their energy into making sure that the earth feels included in our struggle of humanity. Politics can sometimes feel like children striving to feel included. They want to be selected, they need to be. Indeed, they need to be elected, which is a selection, so they want to be included. But unhealthy child behavior in that sphere is when they need to put down others so that they can feel more included. Maybe that can sound political too, or buddying up to the in crowd, even if you don't agree with the in crowd, but you're going to buddy up just so that you can feel included. So sometimes it feels like political rhetoric and behavior is still locked in that underdeveloped child formation. And so here we have an example of a 12-year-old that is more fiscally responsible than the provincial government, demanding investment in clean, renewable energy rather than pumping 900 million in what will no doubt become stranded assets. This 12-year-old is being more morally responsible than the provincial government, demanding decisions that protect the health and welfare of all of its citizens. So I guess I would just like to close by saying, if governments are going to behave like children, let it be more moral and fiscally responsible, such as the demands of this 12-year-old. Thank you. So Peter, Glenn, let's come on up here. I think we've got time for question and answers. And so if you have any questions, they will definitely have the answers. Yeah.
I guess this is a question for Glenn. I'm wondering about the likelihood that the federal government might intervene and try to enforce their regulations on the province.
And can online hear the voices across?
They should be able to.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead. So how likely is it that the federal government will intervene?
Well, I would like to think normally they probably will intervene, but we're in a very strange political time right now. And I guess I can give the federal government some understanding as they're trying to maintain national unity, while we try and defend the threats from south of the border and try and work with new trade negotiations elsewhere. We're at the preliminary stage with our case right now, trying to survive this application of strike. If we do, and our case is going to be heard on its merits, that will sort of open the door to allow others to intervene. Maybe we'll get some more environmental organizations to intervene. Perhaps, Westmoreland Coal or other coal unions may intervene on the opposite side, trying to make arguments saying that, no, this is a smart decision. I can't imagine, but certainly I do think this is, again, part of the rule of law. If you pass laws but don't enforce them, and that's really what we're talking about here. The federal government has laws, and if they're going to turn a blind eye to what Saskatchewan is doing, that's bad for our whole society.
And that's a big part of what CPJ is doing in the lobbying then as well, because our focus is on the federal policies, and this here is where the federal government, if you're gonna make a law, then why keep allowing for provinces to step away from it? What good is your clean energy initiatives then? So, yeah.
There's another area where you see the federal government not enforcing the law that's climate change related, and that is, and I think it's a real signal that they'll probably be slow to enforce here. Saskatchewan, as of April 1st of this year, violated federal law by refusing to collect a carbon tax on industrial emitters, heavy industrial emitters. We're paying over $400 million in carbon tax. The provincial government made a decision to forego that revenue. So in other words, all those costs are going to have to be picked up by the taxpayers of Saskatchewan. And at the same time, while they did that, they blatantly violated federal law, and the government of Canada has done nothing so far to enforce it. So as Glenn says, it sends and Willard said, it sends a very bad signal in terms of a precedent that's being set.
A question, what if the provincial government says this has nothing to do with the law? It's up to the citizens in their political process.
That's what they're saying.
Not the legal system at all.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's one of the arguments that the judge did ask, right? But I thought Glenn had a good response.
Well, in fact, it's one of the arguments the government lawyers made when we were in court on Monday, saying this is nothing but pure policy, and the government should be allowed to do its legislative duty. But this brings us back to what we're arguing in this case, and it's quite different from the constitutional challenge of our gas case. This is just about this specific decision and whether it's reasonable or not. So we're saying the 3-page letter that was sent out, that there aren't adequate reasons in there to justify, a complete reversal of direction. Because for the past 15 years, we've all been singing off the same song sheet, saying we're going to comply with the federal government, we're going to end our coal by 2030 or shortly thereafter. So when a decision like that is made, even if it is a decision of high policy, the courts still have the jurisdiction to review the decision to make sure it's reasonable. So what we're trying to say is that 3-page letter is not a sufficient enough set of reasons to justify such a radical change. So if an administrative decision maker decided to put a dump right next to your house, you should be able to look at the decision that was made and at least see the reasons and make sure that those reasons are justified, they're transparent, and they're intelligible. You can understand it. That 3-page letter we received doesn't do that.
Glenn also pointed out that by the emissions that will come from the coal, refurbishing the coal and extending it, will make it impossible for Saskatchewan to meet their equivalency agreement. And so they, maybe right now it's not breaking the law, but it will. And it would be, but then they would argue back, well, maybe the law will change before that happens, right? But it's a willful act with the current law and that they have, it's a willful act to intend to break that law.
If I could spin off that was a large part of the government's argument. They're saying, we're not breaking the law yet. Right? We're not breaking the law today. And Peter makes a good point that they actually are breaking the law with respect to pollution pricing. That's already happening right now. And the federal government's not enforcing it yet. I'm not sure when they will, but something is going to have to happen there because that ongoing law breaking, just can't can't exist forever. But on the case of this coal decision, that they're not breaking the law today, we know that they're putting us on a path, because these decisions, it takes several years to refurbish a plant and put it into service. And so it's kind of like premeditation, you know, in the criminal law context, if you're doing murder, first degree is much worse than manslaughter because you thought about it. You planned this, right? That's the kind of thing that's happening here. We're putting us on a path where we're knowingly choosing to put us in a position where we'll be breaking the law. And we're saying the courts should be proactive. They should be allowed to take precautionary, you know, measures and look at this kind of thing and see the decision for what it is.
Yeah, thanks.
And
Any other
breaking-
questions?
And we're planning to break it for 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
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 Any questions online?
Online.
None yet? Question there?
Well, it's not so much a question as an observation about how the provincial government is intending to spend our money on things that are outrageously expensive, will take a very long time, and are harmful. Whether you're talking about nuclear power plants, which won't be available, even the small ones are not going to be available for 15 years, in which case, you know, it's too late. And the 900 million that they're planning to spend on revitalizing coal powered plants, when they could spend small amounts of money on solar panels next week. You know, do we want to spend outrageous amounts of money for something that's harmful that will happen in 15 years? Or do we want to spend something that's cheap and works and is responsible and we can do tomorrow?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It just seems so insane to me.
You can bring wind and solar facilities online easily within a couple of years.
Yeah.
Planning a nuclear facility, you're looking at 12, 15
Yeah.
year time span. So in
And
terms
you
of-
talked about cogeneration. Every farmer in the province could put up some solar panels, and that's cogeneration, right? You put it a two-way meter, and you've got a whole lot more energy during the day, and it's and the farmers will even spend their money on it. It's private money.
It's not cogeneration of electricity, but it's a great way to produce electricity.
Yeah.
Okay, question at the back?
I have a question around like what kinds of things can now that we know that this court case is happening, like what are the ways that we can support that or help bring awareness to the court case, or like what kinds of things would be helpful for you insofar as you're beginning this journey, how do we journey with you?
Yeah, excellent. I mean, I think first is become familiar with it. You can go to SES website, CPJ website, and all lots of good material there, so you're aware. As in all advocacy matters, it's bring this up to conversation. Talk about it with your friends, your neighbors, and then talk to your elected officials. I mean, let them know that the Saskatchewan people just are not willing to let the Saskatchewan government continue to do silly things. Not only silly, but it's dangerous. It's just, we just will not tolerate that, right? If the judge is true and say, well, you know, then elect us out. Well, then you better make it clear that we will elect them out if they continue this kind of behavior. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say specifically, you could write to your MLAs. Regina, I mean, I think they're all NDP MLAs now, and the NDP just passed at their convention 6 weeks ago, a resolution about coal.
Yeah.
And yet, despite that 6 weeks having passed, I haven't heard the NDP say a darn thing about coal. So the more they hear from you as constituents, writing to your MLA about how you're frustrated that SaskPower is going to be, you know, reinvesting in coal, you need to do that. You can also write to your council, the city of Regina. Regina will not be able to meet its net zero or its emissions reductions targets without clean electricity from SaskPower. So when SaskPower is being directed to do this, to use dirty coal for energy, it undermines all of our ambition. Private business or municipalities or us as individuals. None of us are going to be able to get on the path we need to if we don't have clean electricity. And then if you're so inclined to make donations, we have no money, but we know we need to do communications work, advertising work, you know, paying people to write copy and fact sheets. If you are inclined to make a donation, it goes to either CPJ or SES, and then it helps us do things like buying social media advertising or maybe even billboards if we get ambitious and have some money. But everything we're doing right now is very much a David versus Goliath situation because we're a lucky group of volunteers.
And there are other court costs. As I said, Glenn is generously giving of his time for this, but there are other court-related costs, and the government in their latest arguments on Monday said, if we win this case, we want to be awarded costs. In other words, CPJ and the Environmental Society would have to cover their costs. So donations would be appreciated.
Don't lose.
I have time for.
There's some questions. There's a question online.
Oh.
There is. I think we answered the first one already, was the same as in the room, suggestions for individuals, but the second question, please say more about costs of nuclear power versus alternatives. Mark Bigland Pritchard has offered a link in response, but you might have a response.
Do you have something,
Yeah,
Peter? I think, yeah.
I can do that. The cost, well, first of all, we've got almost 1,500 megawatts of coal on the grid. We're looking at least 1,350 megawatts of coal that's gonna, you know, be maintained. And the government of Saskatchewan is proposing to replace coal gradually with what are called small modular nuclear reactors. They're not really small. And they're 300 megawatts. So in other words, you need to build 5 of them in order to replace coal. And the provincial government's estimate of what each one of those would cost is $5 billion. So just to put it in context, the government is proposing, and I think 5 billion, by the way, is low, and that's just construction costs. It's like the nuclear power is famous for overrunning its budgets. But let's assume the $5 billion figure for a minute. Well, SaskPower's current debt on its assets is a little over $10 billion. And so what the province is proposing to do, if it's really serious about replacing each of these coal-fired power plants with a nuclear reactor, is to spend $25 billion on replacement. Well, that is the definition of insanity. And SaskPower will go bankrupt. And SaskPower is already 70% debt financed, and it's more than $10 billion in debt right now. So you can just see, it's no accident that Premier Moe is proposing that nuclear reactors be publicly owned. All the wind power facilities that have gone up in the last 18 years under the Sask Party government are all privately owned. Most of the natural gas fired power stations that have been built in the last 18 years have been privately owned. But for when it comes to nuclear power, well, that's going to be publicly owned in this province. And that's a recipe for driving SaskPower into deep debt. Just one final comment, a couple of final comments on this. One is that, for context, when you're comparing wind power and nuclear power, you can put up 7 or 8 300 megawatt wind farms for the equivalent cost of one 300 megawatt nuclear reactor. It's not completely comparable because wind is intermittent, but the cost comparison is enormous. And the same with solar. You could put up 6 to 7 300 megawatt solar farms for the price of one 300 megawatt nuclear reactor. And if you're comparing conservation versus nuclear power, you could put up, you can do 300 megawatts of electricity efficiency easily for $1.5 billion, where you're looking at $5 billion for the nuclear reactor. So it's nuclear is the most expensive way to go by far. And it's not just the construction cost, then you're looking at all the costs that are associated with managing the radioactive waste and storing it over a long period of time. So the costs don't stop. And then you have to dismantle the plant, there's costs associated with that. So the economics of, you have to
We're
robotically,
just wrapping up,
you know,
so
cut it up.
I'll
and
talk to you
dismantle it.
later.
Nuclear power is a very expensive option.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. I'll talk to you then. If I can just do a short follow-up.
Yeah, please do.
Bye-bye.
I know that many of us can't do numbers in our heads. When we hear these big numbers like $5 billion for each one of the 5 plants Peter talked about, $5 billion is an enormous amount of money. But if you were to give instead 500,000 people, each give them $10,000 to put up solar. I mean, I'm sure there aren't more than 500,000 homes in Saskatchewan, right? You could give each home $10,000 to put solar on their roofs. And then they would all have a net meter. They would all be more engaged and in tune to how they use energy. It would help drive down in that conservation mindset. And I can guarantee you those $10,000 to put up solar on individual homes, that would be done by local contractors, right? It would not be the GE or the Westinghouse coming from the United States, or even in the best case, we might have a nuclear industry from Ontario coming here to build it. Those would be local Saskatchewan jobs. So this is part of why we need to talk about how there's more economic opportunity in renewable energy than there is in the big nuclear or in fossil fuels.
Okay, I think,
If you're wondering about time, we have had a slight change to our program. So we do have time for this discussion that is ongoing here. So I think we could still take another question or two. Or I have one if there aren't any here.
comment here, yeah?
Yes, the comment would be, so the province falls back on this thing about, well, we have the uranium. And isn't that true? We've got the uranium. We can do this. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for raising this one, because one of the things that I think is very inaccurate is that the Saskatchewan government is saying, well, we're gonna use our uranium for these small modular nuclear reactors. No, they're not. I'm not saying there won't be any Saskatchewan uranium in it, but these, unlike a CANDU reactor, the small modular nuclear reactors require enriched uranium. And uranium enrichment does not take place in Canada. Uranium enrichment takes place in the United States. And so they'll be buying uranium from the United States. And then the enrichment facilities in the US are both civilian and military facilities. So in other words, if you enrich uranium to 90% for making nuclear weapons, you enrich, but in this case, uranium would be enriched to about 20%. So it would be a civilian use, but it's taking place in the same plants, just to be clear. The same enrichment facilities are doing both. So this will not be necessarily Saskatchewan uranium, but I don't mean that there won't be any Saskatchewan content, but there could be uranium from lots of other parts of the world too.
But we'll never have any problems with the US, right?
I have a question for you, Peter. I noticed on Glenn's slide about the Supreme Court decision, it mentioned that those facts about the reality of climate change were uncontested. That, as I understand it, means that our government agreed. This is not just the federal court telling our government that this is real. Our government agreed in that process that climate change is real, but they don't tell the public that. Certainly. And I've noticed that when I go talk to NDP candidates or members, they tell me, well, we can't talk about the reality of climate change on the doorstep because we have to get elected first. Is there a way we can demand that our government, which sets the narrative, both on the government side and on the opposition side, is there a way we can demand that these people show leadership?
No.
Is there some way we can get them to take that role?
I actually thought Prime Minister Carney would take that role on in his new role as Prime Minister, because he was, after all, the United Nations climate envoy, right? And so it's so disappointing to see his government basically rolling back climate change policy rather than moving it forward and not talking about the realities of climate change. I think he missed a real opportunity this spring after he'd been elected. And all the first ministers met in Saskatoon with the Prime Minister. Boreal forest was on fire. In fact, this season, Saskatchewan lost more than 3 million hectares of boreal forest, the worst forest fire season we've had in this province. And, you know, and Alberta and Saskatchewan were asking for more money to be invested in oil pipelines. And it was the perfect opportunity for the Prime Minister to say, look, our boreal forest is on fire. And this is just the beginning of the consequences we're going to face if we don't deal with climate change. There wasn't a word said about climate change at that meeting. So it signaled to me that there's a shift taking place, that the Prime Minister is backing away from talking about climate change. He really needs to be reminded about the book he wrote on values. You know, I think a lot of people who voted for him believed that he was going to be true to that book. And you know, there are lots of signals now that some federal climate policy is being abandoned. And of course, his two lead ministers, Minister Wilkinson and Minister Gobel, were both moved out of their positions, right? And replaced with what I consider to be much weaker ministers on the climate file. That was another signal that we're heading in the wrong direction. And now with the federal budget, we're seeing all kinds of signals. Even the simple act of planting trees and the money that was going to be invested in 2 billion trees, that's gone now. You know, there's just one example. There's many signals in that budget of backing away from big climate policy. So the federal government needs to be lobbied hard, because to educate the public, you know, the Prime Minister would have been so well placed to do public education, and that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And of course, our provincial government here and the official opposition, NDP opposition, you know, talk about climate change and the scientific realities of climate change. It's a real abdication of leadership. The NDP needs to be pushed hard on this file too. It's not just the Saskatchewan Party, it's the NDP. The NDP, you know, when the vote came up more than a year ago now in the Saskatchewan legislature on the affordable power plan, which was premised, this is before the last election, was premised on burning coal. And it was a unanimous vote in favor of it in the House. Every New Democrat MLA voted for it, as well as every Sask Party MLA. So there's a major effort that needs to be made to press both parties to get serious about addressing climate change, and starting with a phase out of coal is one of the key things that we need to do.
Yeah. So one of the things I think is that this is being recorded, or has been recorded, and this will be made available to all registered participants. So an easy thing is to pick up that recording when you get it, send it to your friends. Did you know about this? And there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Hey. I want to thank all of you for being here, and for whatever ways that you will find to take this work forward in your communities and your households and wherever you, in your workplaces, wherever you have opportunities to make your activities connect, make connections to this in your own activities. I thank you for whatever you will find, and I'm sure you will find things. Thank you to Holy Child for hosting us. And a big thank you to the planners from KAIROS Regina, Nick Jessen here, Dan Beveridge, Carol, I believe that was Carol Chubb, has worked online and was with us today online. She's in Saskatoon, but is very active with KAIROS Regina. And Kathy Cameron, who was unable to be with us today except to deliver that wonderful lunch. So thank you to the planning.
Laura, if I could, I'd like to jump into that thank you and offer a Jubilee gift to the planners.
Oh,
Very nice.
wow. Nice.
And while that is being distributed, I'm going to call on Andy, who has offered to share a closing prayer for us.
Actually never done this before in a large group setting, so this is kind of something.
Think of us as a small group.
Thank you. So let's have say a prayer. Creator God, we thank you for the day that we have had to share together and to learn. As we go forth into your beautiful world, help us to remember all that we have learned and help us to share and get this message out to as many people as we can. In your wonderful name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Let me work.
Thanks for being with us, everyone online. And we look forward to seeing you next time.